The first thing that felt wrong wasn't the silence, it was the way the silence kept listening back. My name is Evan Mercer. I was 39 that November, old enough to trust my instincts, stubborn enough to ignore them. I grew up in northern Arizona, learned deserts the way some people learn oceans, by reading the wind and the sky and the spaces in between. By 2023, I'd logged thousands of miles in my Volkswagen RV, slow miles, deliberate miles, never chasing destinations, only the feeling of arriving somewhere that didn't care whether I stayed or left. Joshua Tree was supposed to be easy, familiar, a place where nothing sneaks up on you because everything is already exposed. I arrived just after dusk, and November air, sharp and clean, the desert cooling fast the way it always does when the sun drops and abandons you without apology. The campground was sparsely occupied, 2 rigs far off to the west, their porch lights dim and amber like tired eyes. I chose a spot near a cluster of boulders that looked like frozen waves, stacked and paused mid-collapse. No cell service, but that wasn't unusual. I preferred it that way. I shut off the engine and sat there longer than I needed to, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the metal tick as it cooled. That's when the quiet first pressed in. Not empty, not peaceful. Dense. Expectant. I told myself it was just the desert doing what it always does, stripping sound down to its bones. I stepped out, boots crunching over sand and gravel, the smell of creosote faint but sharp in the cold air. The sky was already bruising purple, stars beginning to punch through. Somewhere far off, a wind moved through rock hollows, producing a low, hollow moan that felt less like weather and more like breath. Still, I went through my routine. Level the RV, check the locks, set up the small solar panel. Muscle memory kept my mind occupied, and for a while, the unease faded into the background like static you don't notice until it changes. It was when I turned on the radio that the night shifted. I didn't need music. I rarely did. But I liked knowing there was a voice out there, something tethering me loosely to the rest of the world. I twisted the dial slowly, letting stations slide past, snippets of talk radio, bursts of mariachi, evangelical sermons echoing like they'd been recorded inside a cave. Then the radio crackled. Not static, not interference. Words. Copy that. You shouldn't be there. I froze with my hands still on the dial. The voice was distorted, stretched thin, like it had traveled a very long way through something that didn't want it passing through. Male, maybe middle-aged, clipped and tense. The cadence of someone trained to speak clearly, under pressure. I leaned closer to the console, heart tapping once, then settling. "Hello?" I said out loud before I realized how stupid that was. The radio wasn't a two-way. It hadn't been modified. It was stock. The voice continued, slipping in and out beneath a wash of low-frequency hum. Signals wrong, repeating, do not. Then it vanished. Static rushed back in, aggressive now, like the radio was embarrassed for letting something through. I told myself it was bleed over from a nearby military range, or hikers using ham radios bouncing signals off the rock formations. Joshua Tree was notorious for strange acoustics, strange transmissions. I'd heard stories. Stories weren't evidence. Still, I shut the radio off. Night came down hard after that. The temperature dropped fast, the kind of cold that sneaks in through the floorboards and settles into your ankles. I cooked a simple meal, beans, bread, something hot to anchor myself, and ate standing up, listening. The desert wasn't silent anymore. There were sounds everywhere now. Wind shifting direction too frequently. Small scuttling movements near the rocks. Once a sharp crack like stone striking stone echoed from somewhere behind the RV, followed by nothing at all. I locked the door. It was an old habit, one I'd learned not from fear but from respect. Out here, everything earned its boundaries. I climbed into the bed early, pulled my jacket tighter, and lay staring at the ceiling where shadows from the moon traced slow, crawling patterns. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I drifted, my mind replayed the voice. Not the words, the certainty behind them. You shouldn't be there. Sometime after midnight, the radio turned itself on. I sat bolt upright, heart slamming so hard it felt like it might bruise something important. The interior of the RV glowed faintly from the dashboard, the dial illuminated, the needle twitching back and forth on its own. The sound wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Evan? My name slid out of the speaker like it had been waiting for the right moment. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. My lungs locked, body rigid, every nerve screaming for movement and refusing it at the same time. The voice stuttered, warped by interference, but the syllables were unmistakable. Evan Mercer, if you're hearing this. No, I whispered. My throat burned. No, that's not. I reached for the radio, fingers shaking so badly I missed the power knob the first time. The moment my skin touched the plastic, a sharp shock snapped through my hand, not enough to injure, but enough to make me yelp and jerk back. The radio laughed. I don't mean it laughed like a person. It was a burst of sound, garbled and mechanical, but the rhythm of it, the timing was unmistakably wrong, mocking, a parody of humor assembled from broken parts. The laughter dissolved into static, then into a new voice. This one was calmer, female, measured. You stayed past the warning window. The RV creaked as a gust of wind hit the side, rocking it gently, insistently, like a hand testing whether a door would give. I forced myself to speak, each word scraped raw from my chest. Who is this? The response came immediately, too immediately. We're trying to reach you, but the desert keeps answering first. A smell crept into the RV then. Hot dust and ozone, like the air before a lightning strike, mixed with something older, rust, maybe, or metal left too long in the sun. It filled my nose, my mouth, coated my tongue. I gagged, fumbled for the door handle, then stopped. Outside, footsteps circled the RV. Slow, deliberate. Not the light patter of animals, not the uneven drag of wind-blown debris. These were measured steps, crunching gravel with weight and intention. The radio whispered again, "Don't let it hear you move." The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I stood there in the dark, heart hammering, breath shallow and loud in my own ears, the desert pressing in from all sides, listening, learning the shape of me. And somewhere between the rocks and the radio waves, something had already decided I was part of the signal now. The footsteps didn't retreat. They adjusted. That was the detail that broke me, the subtle shift in weight, the slow scrape of something being dragged just enough to find balance. Whoever or whatever stood outside wasn't surprised by my silence. It was accounting for it. I pressed my back against the kitchenette, every muscle locked, listening so hard my ears rang. The radio stayed on, its low hum vibrating through the cabinets, through the thin walls, through my bones. I wanted to shut it off, smash it if I had to, but the memory of that shock, sharp corrective, kept my hands pinned to my sides. The female voice returned, quieter now, intimate, as if it had leaned closer to me through the speaker. It's mapping you by sound, by heat, by hesitation. A shadow slid past the frosted window by the door. Tall. Too tall. It bent where no human knee should bend, joint reversing briefly before correcting itself. Like a bad edit smoothed over too late, my mind tried to rationalize, fatigue, fear, a trick of moonlight and stress, but my body knew better. The smell intensified, ozone and dust, undercut now by something sour, organic. The air felt charged, prickling my skin. My scalp tightened the way it does before bad news. The radio crackled sharply, the male voice breaking through again, urgency punching holes through distortion. Evan, listen to me. This is not a live transmission. If you're hearing this, you need to. A loud knock slammed into the side of the RV. Not a bang, not a crash, a knock. 3 deliberate raps, evenly spaced, too polite for the violence they carried. The cupboards rattled. My teeth clicked together. Outside, the shape shifted again, closer now, close enough that I could hear breath, or something mimicking breath, draw in, pause, release. The radio screamed, not volume, frequency. A high, piercing tone flooded the RV, stabbing straight through my skull. I dropped to my knees, palms over my ears, vision tunneling as nausea surged. Through the pain, through the shriek, a chorus of voices overlapped, stacked, misaligned. You answered when you shouldn't have. Signal breach confirmed. Joshua Tree repeats what it's given. Open the door. I screamed then. I couldn't help it. The sound ripped out of me, raw and panicked, and the moment it did, everything outside went still, dead still. The tone cut off, the radio went silent. In the aftermath, the quiet was unbearable. Thick, swollen, like the air itself was holding its breath. I waited, counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 20. Nothing moved. I forced myself upright, legs shaking so badly I had to grip the counter to stay standing. My reflections stared back at me in the darkened microwave door, eyes too wide, face drained of color, a stranger wearing my skin. You're not thinking clearly, I told myself. You need light, space, air. I reached for the overhead switch. The lights flickered once, twice, then came on weakly, casting long, distorted shadows that crawled across the walls. Outside the window, there was nothing. No shape, no movement, just moonlit rock and sand. The smell began to fade. Slowly, carefully, I stepped toward the door and peered through the narrow gap in the curtain. The campsite looked unchanged, empty, quiet, indifferent. The distant RVs still glowed faintly in the west, their lights steady, reassuringly normal. Had they heard anything? The knock? The scream? I unlocked the door before I could stop myself. Cold air rushed in, clean and sharp, scouring the stale smell from the RV. I stepped down onto the gravel, every sense stretched taut. The ground showed no footprints, no disturbed stones, no sign that anything had been there at all. Except for one thing. My radio antenna had been twisted. Not snapped, not bent by wind. Twisted, wound tightly around itself, metal strained and whitened at the stress points, as if someone had grabbed it and turned until it couldn't turn anymore. A tremor ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I backed inside, locked the door again, and this time I unplugged the radio entirely, yanked the fuse from the panel. The RV dimmed slightly, systems adjusting, but I didn't care. I needed silence that wasn't listening. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat at the dinette until dawn, wrapped in a blanket, watching shadows stretch and shrink as the moon crossed the sky. Every sound made me flinch. Every gust of wind felt like a test. Just before sunrise, the radio spoke again, even unplugged. "You can't leave yet." The words oozed from the speaker, low and distorted, vibrating the metal casing. I stared at it, horror washing over me in waves. "How?" I croaked. "You're not even powered." The answer came layered, multiple voices slipping over one another like broken mirrors. "The desert remembers signals. It replays what lingers. You stayed long enough." The RV shuddered, not from wind, but from something passing beneath it. A slow scrape, metal groaning softly as if dragged over stone. Panic finally snapped its leash. I lunged for the driver's seat, hands fumbling with the keys, breath coming in ragged gasps. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. Headlights cut through the pre-dawn gloom, beams slicing across rock and scrub. For a split second, something stood at the edge of the light. It was tall, impossibly thin, its outline wavering like heat distortion. Where a face should have been, there was only darkness. No features, no depth, just absence. And from that absence came sound, a warped echo of my own voice screaming back at me. I slammed the accelerator. The RV lurched forward, gravel spraying as I tore out of the campsite, not caring about direction, only distance. The thing didn't chase me. It didn't need to. As I sped down the dirt road, the radio flared to life one last time, blasting overlapping transmissions, military codes, emergency broadcasts, fragments of personal conversations that felt stolen, intimate. And beneath it all, a whisper threaded through the noise. "We'll finish the message later." I didn't slow until I hit pavement. Didn't stop until the sun was fully up and the desert looked harmless again, bleached and still like it had never moved at all. I drove for hours before pulling over, hands numb on the wheel, mind replaying every sound, every word. When I finally dared to check the radio, it was dead, completely inert. No power, no static, but etched faintly into the plastic faceplate as if burned from the inside was a single word: received. I sold that Volkswagen a month later. Couldn't bring myself to sleep in it again. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the air feels charged, I swear I hear a familiar crackle, like a signal searching for somewhere to land. And I know Joshua Tree is still listening. I thought distance would finish it. that once pavement replaced dirt, once cell towers reappeared, and familiar road signs stitched the world back together, whatever had brushed up against me in Joshua Tree would lose interest. That's what logic said. That's what I clung to as I drove east with the sun climbing behind me, flooding the desert with honesty, stripping the night of its theater. But fear doesn't dissolve with daylight. It calcifies. I pulled into a truck stop outside 29 Palms just after breakfast hours, the place already loud with engines and voices and clattering plates. I sat there for a long time with the engine off, hands resting on the wheel, letting normalcy wash over me in slow, deliberate waves. No whispers, no static, no feeling of being measured. When I finally stepped inside, the smell of coffee and grease hit me so hard it almost made me cry. A woman laughed somewhere behind the counter. Someone dropped a fork. Life continued, reckless and unafraid. I wanted to be part of that again. I ordered coffee I didn't drink and stared at my phone, watching bars of service climb back into existence. Notifications flooded in, missed emails, a voicemail from my sister, weather alerts that suddenly felt obscene in their triviality. No alerts about distorted signals, no warnings about places that listen back. I stayed there until my hands stopped shaking. For the next few weeks, I told myself a careful version of the story. Electrical issues, sleep deprivation, a bad night in an isolating place. Even when I sold the Volkswagen, I framed it as practicality. Time for something newer, safer. I didn't tell the buyer about the antenna or the word burned into the radio. I moved back toward civilization, parked myself in busier campgrounds, then eventually in places that weren't campgrounds at all. RV parks with Wi-Fi passwords and quiet hours and rules posted on laminated signs. Places where silence was regulated. And for a while, it worked. Until the radio in my kitchen at home crackled one evening while I was washing dishes. It wasn't tuned to anything. It wasn't even plugged in. Just a brief burst of static, half a second at most. But my knees buckled anyway, sending me down hard onto the tile floor. My heart hammered as I crawled across the kitchen and ripped the cord from the wall, hands slick with soap and panic. Nothing else happened. That was the worst part. After that, it came in fragments. Always subtle, always deniable. A podcast glitching into military cadence for 3 words too many. A walkie-talkie at a flea market murmuring my name under the buzz of fluorescent lights. A dream where I stood in the desert again, watching my own RV from a distance as something inside it listened to me breathe. I stopped using radios entirely. Music came only through headphones. Even then, I kept the volume low, afraid of what might slip through if I gave the world too much room. I researched Joshua Tree obsessively, chasing reassurance through information. Forums, old ranger reports, obscure blogs written by people who swore the park bent sound in strange ways, that radio signals reflected unpredictably off granite and ionized air, that atmospheric conditions could trap transmissions and replay them hours or years later. Scientific words for something that still felt deeply personal. One night, buried 3 pages deep in a defunct message board, I found a post dated 2009. Anyone else hear voices calling them by name near Hidden Valley? Radio picked up emergency traffic from the future, or the past. Hard to tell. The replies were dismissive. Jokes, static chasing hobbyists. But one comment stood alone, unchallenged. It's not time you're hearing, it's intention. The desert doesn't transmit, it reflects. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, letting that sentence settle into me like a weight. I understood then what had happened. I hadn't stumbled onto a signal, I had aligned with it. Something in Joshua Tree, something shaped by isolation and repetition and the countless voices that had passed through that land over decades, had learned how to echo us, not just our words, but our fear. Our urgency, our need to be heard. It didn't hunt bodies, it harvested attention, and I had given it mine. The realization didn't bring relief, it brought responsibility, a quiet, terrible understanding that running hadn't ended anything, it had only delayed the conversation. So I did the last thing I wanted to do. I went back, not to Joshua Tree itself. I wasn't ready for that. Maybe I never would be. But I returned to the edge of silence, far enough from cities that the stars came back, close enough that I could leave if I had to. I brought no radio, no walkie, no receiver of any kind, just myself. The first night was unbearable. Every sound felt loaded. Every breeze carried expectation. I sat outside under the open sky, forcing myself to listen without reaching for interpretation. Nothing spoke. The second night, I slept. The third night, just before dawn, the air shifted, that familiar pressure, that electric tightening along my skin. I felt watched, evaluated. I didn't wait for a voice this time. "I hear you," I said into the dark, my voice steady despite the fear coiled beneath it. "But I'm not answering anymore." The silence stretched. I stayed. "I don't need to be part of the signal," I continued. "And you don't get to carry me with you." The desert exhaled. Not wind, not sound. Release. I didn't feel triumphant or brave, just smaller. Returned to scale. When I left that place at sunrise, something had changed. Not out there, but in me. I'd learned the cost of attention, the danger of listening without boundaries. Some places don't want to be explored. They want to be acknowledged and left alone. Joshua Tree taught me that, not through terror, but through repetition. Even now, a year later, I still avoid radios when I can. I still pause when static rises unexpectedly, heart stuttering before reason catches up. Some nights, I dream in fragments of voices that never quite finish their sentences. But I wake up, and I choose not to answer. Because out there, in places where sound bends and memory lingers, not every signal is meant to be received. And survival sometimes means knowing when silence is the only safe reply. The first thing that told me something was wrong wasn't the silence. It was how deliberate the silence felt, like the land itself was holding its breath and waiting to see what I'd do next. My name is Evan Mercer, and in July of 2020, I was 36 years old, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix, pulling my 30-foot RV off the narrow road that winds into Red River Gorge, Kentucky. I'd been on the road for weeks by then, moving east after a long stretch out west, chasing quiet places because the world outside the windshield felt too loud, too uncertain, too fragile. Camping had always been my way of grounding myself. Metal box on wheels, coffee before sunrise, gravel under tires, the steady comfort of routines you can control when everything else feels like it's slipping. Red River Gorge was supposed to be a reset. That's what I told myself as I rolled past the weathered wooden sign marking the campground entrance. I'd chosen this place because it was popular, but not crowded, wild, but not remote. The kind of campground where you still hear human laughter echoing off the cliffs at night. That was the expectation I carried with me, the mental image I'd already accepted as real before I ever parked. But expectations are fragile things. I eased the RV forward, tires crunching softly over gravel that hadn't been disturbed in a while. The first loop of campsites came into view, and every single one of them was empty. No tents, no campfires, no lawn chairs tipped back in the dirt, no coolers, no bicycles, no kids' toys forgotten near picnic tables. Just bare pads, fire rings filled with cold ash, and picnic tables bleached gray by sun and rain. I told myself it was early, too early for people to be awake. Maybe they were all out hiking. That explanation slid into place easily because I needed it to. The gorge attracts climbers and early risers. It made sense. Still, something about the emptiness didn't sit right. I parked near Site 12, shut off the engine, and let the ticking metal settle into stillness. The air was thick with summer humidity, that heavy Kentucky heat that clings to your skin like a damp sheet. It smelled green and mineral-rich, with an undercurrent of something sour, old leaves maybe, or stagnant water. I stepped down from the RV and stood there longer than necessary, listening. No birds, no insects, not even the distant echo of traffic. That's when the unease began to seep in. Not fear, not yet, just a low static hum under my thoughts. A quiet pressure behind the eyes. I walked the loop slowly, boots scraping gravel, my shadow stretching long across the empty sites. Each fire pit looked used recently, ash still dark instead of chalk white, Bits of half-burned wood collapsed inward like they'd been abandoned mid-conversation. One picnic table still had a cracked mug sitting upside down on it, rainwater pooled in the base. That stopped me. People don't leave mugs behind. I picked it up. Cold. Clean, except for a faint smear of dirt where a thumb had pressed too hard. I set it back where I found it, suddenly uncomfortable with the idea of taking anything, like the campground itself was still occupied in ways I couldn't see. Back at my RV, I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual here, but it meant I couldn't check recent reviews, couldn't confirm if the campground was officially closed or evacuated. July 2020 had been full of closures, sudden changes, things disappearing overnight. Rational explanations lined up neatly in my head, one after another, like dominoes I could knock down whenever anxiety tried to stand up. I chose a site near the tree line, backed in carefully, leveled the rig, and went through my setup routine on autopilot. Hoses connected, power checked, windows cracked to let the heat breathe out. The normal motions calmed me. Familiarity is a powerful sedative. By late afternoon, the sun sat low and heavy, turning the cliffs beyond the campground a deep rust red. I cooked a simple dinner, beans, rice, something easy, and ate outside, sitting on my RV step. The silence pressed closer as the light faded, thickening instead of softening the way evening usually does. Still no people. That was when denial started to wear thin. I told myself they'd arrive soon. Weekend campers, maybe. I'd just beaten the rush. But when darkness settled fully and the campground remained unchanged, every site empty, every road quiet, the silence stopped feeling neutral and started feeling intentional, as if something had pushed everyone out. Night at Red River Gorge is usually alive. Crickets, frogs, owls, a layered soundscape that reminds you the forest is never truly asleep. That night, it was wrong. Not absent, wrong. The sounds came and went in uneven bursts. A single insect chirp would start, repeat twice, then stop abruptly. The wind moved through the trees without rustling leaves, more like a breath than a breeze. Around 10 p.m., I heard the first knock. It wasn't loud, it wasn't urgent, just a soft, hollow sound against the side of the RV. One knock, then nothing. I froze, hand hovering over the table inside, listening. My heart ticked louder than the forest. I waited for a voice, footsteps, anything that would confirm a person stood outside. Nothing came. I told myself it was a branch, or thermal contraction, or my imagination finally slipping its leash after weeks alone. I went to bed with the lights off, lying rigid, eyes open, watching shadows shift on the ceiling as clouds passed over the moon. The second knock came closer to midnight. This time it was 3 knocks, evenly spaced. 2 measured, 2 intentional. I didn't respond. I lay there, breath shallow, counting seconds between sounds. When nothing else followed, I almost laughed at myself. Fear wants patterns, it wants meaning. If you don't give it one, it'll make its own. Sleep eventually claimed me, shallow and fractured. I woke just before dawn to the smell. It crept into the RV quietly, invasive, like smoke without a source. Not rot exactly, more like damp earth mixed with something metallic, blood adjacent. The kind of smell that it makes your body react before your mind catches up. I sat up, heart racing, scanning the interior. Nothing spilled, nothing burned. The smell grew stronger near the door. Outside, the campground was unchanged. Empty, still. But now there were footprints in the dirt between the sites. Barefoot impressions, leading from the tree line toward my RV, stopping just short of my door. I stood there staring at them, the morning light too gentle for what I was seeing, my rational mind scrambling for control while something older and deeper whispered a single, undeniable truth. Whatever made everyone leave hadn't left. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the footprints like they might rearrange themselves into something sensible if I gave them enough time. They weren't deep, but they were clear. Heels, arches, toes pressed into the damp dirt between my RV and the tree line. Too clean. Too deliberate. No drag marks. No hesitation. Whoever or whatever had walked there had known exactly where it was going and had stopped exactly where my door began. I backed up slowly until my calves hit the metal step of the RV. The smell was stronger now, carried on the warming air clinging to the back of my throat. It wasn't decay. It was closer to iron and wet stone, like rainwater left too long in a rusted container. I climbed back inside, locked the door, and sat down hard at the dinette, palms flat against the table, grounding myself in something solid. This was where denial tried one last time. Animals. That was the explanation my mind offered up like a peace treaty. Bare-looking tracks could be anything distorted by soft ground. Coyotes sometimes left strange impressions. And the smell. Maybe mineral runoff from the gorge, sulfur trapped in the rocks. Red River Gorge is ancient land. Old systems, old smells. I repeated those thoughts as I brewed coffee, as if saying them enough times would make them true. But when I lifted the mug to my mouth, my hands were shaking. By mid-morning, the sun had burned through the fog, and with daylight came a dangerous sense of confidence. Fear doesn't like bright light. It retreats, waits, lets logic take over. I decided to explore the campground properly, to prove to myself there was nothing hiding in the quiet. I walked the perimeter first, following the gravel road as it curved toward the far end where the sites grew closer together. The emptiness felt different now, not surprising, but oppressive. I noticed details I'd ignored the day before. Camp fee envelopes still hanging from their posts, some filled out, dates written in neat handwriting. July 18th, July 19th. The day before I arrived, all checked in, none checked out. Near the bathhouse, the door stood open. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The air was cooler there, damp and echoing. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead. One sink was still wet, droplets clinging to porcelain. A paper towel lay crumpled near the trash as if someone had just washed their hands and been interrupted mid-motion. Interrupted by what? The question followed me back outside and down the path toward the tree line. That was when I heard it, soft at first, almost lost beneath the wind moving through the gorge. A voice, not words, just a sound. A low, wavering call that rose and fell, stretched thin like it was being pulled from deep inside a chest that didn't quite remember how to use it. It came from somewhere beyond the trees, echoing strangely off the cliffs. I froze. The sound repeated, closer this time. There was a shape to it that set my nerves on edge. Not animal, not human, but uncomfortably close to both. Like someone trying to remember how speech works. I didn't wait to hear it again. I turned and walked fast back toward the RV, not running, do you get, because running admits fear, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. The call followed me, drifting through the trees, never getting louder, never fading completely. It stayed just behind me, a presence rather than a pursuit. I slammed the RV door shut and locked it, every click of the deadbolt sounding final. Inside, the temperature felt wrong, cooler than it should have been. I checked the thermostat, off, no AC. Still, the air brushed my skin with a faint chill, raising goosebumps along my arms. That was when the knocking started again. Not on the door this time, on the walls. Soft taps, moving. One knock near the rear of the RV, another along the side, then one near the front, close to the cab. They weren't rhythmic. They weren't random either. They felt curious, exploratory, like fingers testing a boundary. I crouched near the center of the RV, every muscle tight, listening as the knocks circled me slowly. I could hear my own breathing, too loud, too fast. I pressed a hand over my mouth to quiet it. A shadow passed across the frosted bathroom window, human-shaped, tall, too still. It lingered there, blocking the light, and for a moment I thought I saw a hand lift, fingers splayed, pressed against the glass. Then the shadow slid away, dissolving back into daylight. The knocking stopped. Silence returned, but it wasn't relief. It was worse. It felt like the pause before a held breath is finally released. I stayed like that for over an hour, afraid to move, afraid that any sound I made would invite the attention back. When nothing else happened, exhaustion crept in. Adrenaline burns fast and leaves you hollow. I convinced myself that I'd imagined the worst of it, that isolation had amplified normal campground noises into something monstrous. By late afternoon, I decided to leave. That decision came with its own resistance. Pride. Stubbornness. the voice that says you don't abandon plans because of nerves. But another voice, older, quieter, kept repeating the image of the footprint stopping at my door. I started the engine. It coughed once, then died. I tried again. Nothing. That's when panic finally broke through. I popped the hood, hands clumsy, heart hammering as I stared down at an engine that looked perfectly fine to my untrained eye. Battery connections tight, no obvious issues. Still, the engine refused to turn over. Behind me, the forest had gone quiet again. Too quiet. The smell returned, thicker now, drifting from the tree line like a warning. I became acutely aware of how exposed I was standing there, how far the nearest ranger station might be, how little help my silent phone would offer. Then I heard footsteps, slow, unhurried, crunching gravel. I didn't turn around right away. Part of me didn't want to confirm what my instincts were already screaming. When I did turn, there was no one there, just the empty road stretching between sites. And yet, the footsteps continued. They circled me, invisible but present, gravel shifting under unseen weight. I backed toward the RV, hand reaching blindly for the door handle. That was when the voice spoke again. This time it formed words. Stay. The sound of it scraped along my nerves, wrong in every way, too flat, too stretched, like the word had been pulled apart and stitched back together incorrectly. It didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere at once, echoing off rock and tree and metal. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut, locking it, bracing my back against it, as if my body alone could hold whatever was out there, at bay. The RV rocked once, then again. Not violently, gently, like someone testing its balance. That's when I understood the truth I'd been avoiding since I arrived. This wasn't about curiosity. It wasn't about warning. It was about keeping me here. And whatever had emptied this campground in July of 2020 hadn't been finished. The RV rocked a third time, slower than the first two, and that was worse than if it slammed into me with force. Slow meant controlled. Slow meant whatever was outside understood balance, weight, leverage. I pressed my shoulder into the door, feeling the thinness of the metal, suddenly aware of how little separated me from the night and the thing that had learned my outline. Stay, the voice said again, closer now. It came from just outside the door. I didn't answer, I didn't plead, I didn't shout. Some instinct, older than language, told me that acknowledgement would be an invitation. My chest burned as I held my breath, listening to the faint scrape of something moving along the RV's side, fingertips or nails or something that wanted to be either. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the pressure stopped. The RV settled back into stillness. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time had lost its edges. When no new sound followed, I forced myself to move, every motion slow and deliberate. I crept to the driver's seat and turned the key again, more out of desperation than hope. The engine roared to life. The sound felt violent in the silence, like I'd torn a hole in the world. I didn't question it. I didn't wait. I threw the RV into gear and lurched forward, tires spitting gravel as I accelerated out of the sight. As I drove, I risked a glance in the side mirror. Figures stood between the trees. Not rushing, not chasing, just watching. They were tall and thin, their outlines distorted by distance and shadow, but unmistakably upright, human adjacent, too still to be natural. As I gained speed, they didn't follow. They didn't need to. Their stillness carried a confidence that chilled me more than pursuit ever could. The road twisted sharply, cliffs rising on one side, forest dropping away on the other. My hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Every bend felt like a gamble, every shadow like a place something might step out, but nothing did. When I finally burst onto the main road, pavement replacing gravel beneath my tires, I didn't slow down. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station nearly 40 miles away, bright lights buzzing overhead like a different universe entirely. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, breathing in gasoline and hot asphalt, letting the normal sounds of human life stitch me back together. Only then did I notice the dirt smeared along the side of my RV. Handprints, not dragged, not smeared by motion. Placed. I didn't camp again for a long time after that. Months passed before I trusted the quiet the way I used to. Even now, years later, I think about Red River Gorge when the forest goes silent too suddenly, when night sounds thin instead of full. Here's what I learned, what I carry with me every time I pull into a campground now. Nature doesn't always warn you with violence. Sometimes it warns you with absence, with things missing that should be there, with places that feel paused instead of peaceful. When instinct whispers, it doesn't shout, it waits to see if you're listening. Everyone who left that campground before me had listened. I hadn't, and the land noticed. I still believe in RV camping. I still believe in the healing that comes from open roads and quiet mornings and fires that crackle under the stars. But I no longer believe that every quiet place is empty, or that being alone always means being safe. Some places don't want witnesses. Some places remember who stays. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave before the land decides for you. The first sound came from above my head, and in that moment I understood how thin metal really is. My name is Ethan Rowe. I was 36 years old in October of 2022, and I had driven my old Volkswagen camper, faded forest green, held together more by habit than bolts, into Shenandoah National Park because I needed quiet. Not vacation quiet, not postcard quiet. I needed the kind of quiet that presses against you until you're forced to hear your own thoughts clearly without escape. I'd grown up in Western North Carolina, raised on campgrounds and back roads, and I trusted the woods in a way city people never do. Trees didn't scare me. Darkness didn't scare me. Animals didn't scare me. What unsettled me, even before that night, was how easily confidence could turn into denial when you wanted peace badly enough. The campground sat off Skyline Drive, high enough that the air already smelled like frost, even though the leaves were still clinging to branches in burnt oranges and dying reds. My site was tucked near the edge, where the trees pressed close and the road noise disappeared completely after sunset. No neighboring RVs close enough to see, just a bear box, a fire ring, and the quiet breathing of the forest. By the time night settled in, the temperature dropped faster than expected, the kind of cold that seeps through your boots and makes your knuckles ache when you grip the steering wheel. I cooked a simple dinner inside the van, steam fogging the windows, radio off, letting the silence stretch. I remember thinking how heavy the air felt, like the mountains were holding their breath. That was my first mistake. Romanticizing the stillness. By 10 o'clock, the campground was fully dark. No moon. Just tree silhouettes cutting into a starless sky. I locked the doors, out of habit more than fear, and climbed into the narrow bed built into the back of the van. The metal roof hovered just inches above me, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating down through it. I was drifting, half asleep, when I heard it. A scrape. Not loud. Not sudden, just a slow, deliberate dragging sound, as if something had brushed the roof with intent. I held my breath, listening, every muscle tightening as my brain reached for a reasonable explanation. A branch, wind, acorns falling, anything except what my instincts were already whispering. Then it happened again. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. The sound moved. Not randomly. It traveled from the front of the roof toward the center, each movement separated by silence long enough to let my imagination do damage. Whatever it was had weight, enough to flex the metal slightly, enough that I felt a faint vibration through the mattress beneath me. I told myself it was a raccoon. Shenandoah had plenty of them. Clever little thieves with hands that could open latches and tear into coolers. I had dealt with raccoons my whole life. They scratched, they investigated, they left. But raccoons didn't move like that. The smell came next. It was faint at first, barely noticeable. Something damp and organic, like wet leaves left too long in a pile. Mixed with it was a sharper edge, almost metallic, the kind of smell you notice right before a storm breaks. I shifted in the bed, heart pounding now, trying to control my breathing so it wouldn't sound loud in the cramped space. Above me, the scratching stopped. Silence returned. But it was different now. Thicker. Intentional. I could feel myself waiting, bracing, like my body knew what was coming, even if my mind refused to accept it. Then came the tapping. One slow knock. Not an animal's frantic clawing, not random debris. A single, measured tap right above where my head rested. The sound echoed through the hollow roof, magnified by the metal until it felt like it came from inside my skull. I whispered out loud, "Nope," as if naming the fear might keep it contained. Another tap followed, closer to the edge, like something repositioning itself. I slid my hand toward the flashlight mounted near the back door, careful not to jostle the van. Every movement felt amplified. The mattress creaked softly under my weight, and I froze, convinced that any sound I made was being evaluated by whatever was up there. The tapping became scratching again, slower now, dragging across the roof in a curved path. I could track it by sound alone, front to back to front, like pacing. My thoughts spiraled into rationalizations. A bear? Too light, too controlled. A deer? Impossible. Wind? There was none. The trees outside were still, like their branches frozen in place against the black sky. I sat up slightly, heart hammering, and that's when I heard breathing. Not loud enough to echo, just a soft, irregular exhale, muffled by metal but unmistakably present. It synced with the pauses between the scratches, like whatever was above me was listening too. I thought about yelling, about honking the horn, about turning on every light inside the van. But fear does strange things. It convinces you that stillness is safety, that attention is danger. The smell grew stronger. I could feel the cold more intensely now, as if the roof itself was leaching warmth from the air inside. Goosebumps crawled up my arms, and I wrapped my jacket tighter around my chest, suddenly aware of how thin the walls were, how laughably fragile my shelter really was. Another knock. This one wasn't above my head. It was directly over the driver's seat, right above the windshield, followed by a slow, dragging sound that moved downward toward the edge of the roof. Toward the door, I stared at the handle, imagining fingers, no, claws, curling around it, testing, learning. My breath caught in my throat as the van shifted ever so slightly, a gentle rock that made the suspension creak. Something had put weight on the side. I finally clicked the flashlight on, its beam slicing through the dim interior, bouncing off cabinets and metal walls. The sudden light made me flinch, expecting an immediate response. Instead, everything went quiet again. Too quiet. I waited, muscles screaming from tension, ears straining to catch the slightest sound. Seconds stretched into minutes. I convinced myself I'd imagined it all, that exhaustion and altitude had played tricks on me. Then came the sound that broke me. A long, slow scrape, deliberate, careful, ending with a faint thud, as if something had lowered itself down from the roof and landed just outside the door, right beside my head. And that's where I need to stop for now, because what happened next was the moment my denial finally shattered, and I realized the forest was just watching me. It was closing in. The van settled after the thud, the suspension giving a tired groan, like it resented me for bringing it here in the first place. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds that felt long enough to change who I was permanently. Whatever had climbed down was now on the ground. I knew exactly where it stood without seeing it. Close enough that if I opened the door, it would be right there, filling the frame, leaving me no time to react. That certainty came from somewhere deeper than logic. It came from instinct, the kind I'd ignored my whole life because I believed experience made me immune to fear. The smell intensified. It was unmistakable now. Damp earth, rot, and something animal, but not in the clean way wildlife usually smells. This was layered, old, as if it carried other places with it. Other nights. I clicked the flashlight off. Light suddenly felt like a liability. The interior plunged back into darkness, and my reflection vanished from the window, replaced by the vague suggestion of movement outside. The glass had fogged slightly from my breath, turning the world beyond into a warped, shifting shadow. Then came the sound of feet. Not paws. Feet. Slow, careful. Each step pressed into the gravel with enough force to crunch, but not enough to scatter stones. Whoever or whatever it was knew how to move quietly and chose not to. That detail crawled under my skin. Predators don't announce themselves unless they want something to know they're there. The steps stopped directly beside the sliding door. I could see the handle from where I lay, a dull silhouette against the darker outline of the door. I imagined it being examined, tested, learned. My fingers dug into the fabric of the mattress as a new sound joined the night. A faint clicking noise, irregular, like teeth tapping together or nails brushing metal. A memory surfaced then, uninvited. I was 12 years old, camping with my father in Pisgah National Forest. We'd heard something moving around the tent late at night, and I'd asked him what it was. He hadn't looked scared. He hadn't even sat up. He just said, if it wanted in, it wouldn't bother being quiet. That belief had followed me into adulthood, stitched into my sense of safety like an old patch I never thought to remove. Outside the van, the clicking stopped. The silence stretched again, and in that silence, I felt watched. Not the abstract feeling of being observed, but the tangible pressure of attention. Like something was leaning in close enough that the window glass felt thinner, more symbolic than functional. Then the handle moved. It didn't jerk. It didn't rattle. It rotated slowly, carefully, until it hit resistance. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might be sick. The handle returned to its resting position with the same measured calm. A pause followed, long enough for hope to bloom stupidly in my chest, long enough for me to believe it had tried once and given up. Then it tried again, this time harder. The van rocked slightly as weight shifted against the door. I heard breath again, closer now, louder, fogging the glass from the outside. The flashlight sat inches from my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it on. I didn't want to see what was inches away from me. A soft sound escaped my throat before I could stop it. Not a scream, not even a word, just a quiet, panicked inhale. Outside, the breathing stopped instantly. Every nerve in my body screamed the same message. It heard you. The gravel crunched again as the thing moved away from the door, circling toward the front of the van. I tracked it by sound alone, heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. When it reached the hood, the metal dipped slightly under its weight. Then came the scratching again. This time, not on the roof, on the windshield. The sound made my teeth ache. Long, slow lines traced across the glass, deliberate enough that I could imagine whatever was doing it leaning in, studying its reflection as it worked. The pressure increased until the glass groaned softly, protesting the stress. I whispered, "Please don't," to no one in particular. The scratching stopped. I waited for the crack of shattering glass. It never came. Instead, something slid upward, crawling back onto the roof with a grace that didn't match its size. The metal bowed slightly again, confirming what I already knew. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been. The pacing resumed, front to back to front. Each step landed almost directly above me now. I curled inward, pulling my knees to my chest, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. How ridiculous my sense of control had been. The environment wasn't just an antagonist. It was an accomplice. The cold, the dark, the isolation. They all worked together, pressing me inward, shrinking my world down to the thin shell of a van and the pounding of my own heart. The smell seeped in through the vents. I gagged, clamping a hand over my mouth to keep quiet. My eyes burned, watering from the sharpness of it. It smelled like something that hadn't seen sunlight in a long time. Then the sound changed. No more scratching, no more footsteps, just pressure. The roof above my chest dented inward slightly, a slow, gradual bow as if something had lowered itself down and was now crouched there. The metal creaked softly, complaining under the strain. I couldn't help it anymore. I reached for the flashlight and snapped it on, aiming it straight up. The beam illuminated the dented roof panel inches from my face, and something else. A shadow passed across the light from the outside, long, uneven, with angles that didn't make sense. It moved against the beam, not blocking it completely, just enough to confirm shape, length, intent. The clicking noise returned, louder now, right above my head. I screamed. The sound tore out of me, raw and uncontrolled, echoing inside the van like a gunshot. The roof jerked upward as whatever had been crouched there sprang away, the sudden release of pressure snapping the metal back into place with a violent bang. I didn't wait. I lunged for the driver's seat, fumbling for the keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them onto the floor. Outside, something hit the side of the van hard enough to rock it violently, followed by a guttural sound that might have been a growl, or might have been something worse, something almost vocal. I found the keys, jammed them into the ignition, and turned. Nothing. The engine sputtered, coughed, then died. Outside, the breathing returned. Fast now, excited. I tried again. The engine caught. Headlights flared to life, flooding the trees ahead with harsh white light. For a split second, something moved at the edge of the beam. A tall, uneven silhouette, retreating backward into the darkness, limbs bending the wrong way as it disappeared between the trunks. I slammed the van into gear and floored it, gravel spraying as I tore out of the campsite, branches whipping against the sides, mirrors folding inward under the impact. I didn't slow down until the road lights appeared miles later, my hands cramped around the wheel, throat burning from the scream I still hadn't fully let out. I didn't stop until dawn. And even then, as the sun rose and the world returned to something resembling normal, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been allowed to leave, not escaped, allowed. The sun should have made everything better. That's what I believed as I sat in a rest area off Route 33, engine idling, hands still locked around the steering wheel like they'd forgotten how to let go. Morning light poured over the blue ridge, soft and forgiving, turning the mountains into gentle blue waves instead of looming silhouettes. Birds started up their harmless chatter. A hiker 2 spaces down brewed coffee like it was any other October morning. But the fear didn't leave. It settled. I stepped out of the van and the smell hit me again. Faint now, clinging to the metal like a memory that refused to fade. When I looked up, my stomach tightened. The roof bore the evidence I hadn't wanted to check for in the dark. Shallow dents ran along the center panel, warped in places where weight had rested too long. Long scratches etched the paint, curving, deliberate, ending near the edge where it had climbed down. No claws I recognized, no pattern that made sense. I touched the metal and flinched. It felt colder than it should have under the sun, like it hadn't fully returned from the night. I drove home that day without stopping. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of tires on asphalt and the replaying of every choice that led me into that campground with the arrogant belief that experience was armor. When I finally reached my driveway, I sat there for a long time before getting out, scanning the trees like I expected something to be watching from between them. Sleep didn't come easily after that. When it did, it was thin and fragile, punctured by the same sounds, scratching, tapping, breathing. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart racing, convinced for half a second that the ceiling above my bed was about to bow inward. I told myself it was trauma, adrenaline, my mind filling in gaps with fear. That explanation held until the third night. I was lying awake, staring at the dark when I heard it. A soft scrape, above me. I sat bolt upright, pulse roaring in my ears, eyes locked on the ceiling fan. The sound came again, moving slowly, deliberately. Not on the roof this time, on the house. I forced myself to get up, every instinct screaming not to. The back door opened onto the yard, and I flipped on the porch light, scanning the trees beyond the fence. Nothing. No movement, no smell, no sound. But when I looked down, there were marks in the dirt near the fence line, deep impressions, unevenly spaced, like something had stood there for a long time before moving on. I stopped camping after that. Sold the van 6 months later. Couldn't stand the way the roof creaked when it heated up in the sun. Couldn't stop my eyes from drifting upward whenever I heard metal flex or wood settle. Friends said I'd lost my nerve, that the woods had finally spooked me. They weren't wrong, but they didn't understand what I'd learned. Out there in places like Shenandoah, you're not just a visitor, you're an interruption. Most nights, the forest tolerates that. Some nights, it reminds you how temporary you really are. I still believe in instincts now. I don't rationalize them away. I don't wait for proof when something feels wrong. Because some things don't want inside your RV. Some things just want you to know they're there. And once they do, the quiet never sounds the same again. The first thing that felt wrong was the silence. Too complete, like the dunes had swallowed sound and were holding it in their lungs. My name is Ethan Cole. I was 39 that summer, and I had driven my old Volkswagen camper van farther into southern Colorado than I probably should have alone. The van was a faded sage green, sunburned on one side, rattling in a way that felt familiar and almost comforting. I'd owned it for 7 years, long enough to trust its noises, long enough to know which ones meant trouble. That night, parked near the edge of Great Sand Dunes National Park, the van was quiet. Too quiet. Even the usual metal ticking as it cooled after a long drive never came. I grew up in New Mexico, spent my childhood sleeping under skies so wide they made you feel small in a good way. Camping was never a novelty to me. It was a return. I came to the dunes because I needed space, from a job that had hollowed out my days, from a divorce that left rooms echoing, from the kind of loneliness that isn't loud but persistent. The dunes felt ancient, patient, like they wouldn't rush me. The campground sat low against the edge of the sand sea, scrub grass bending in the wind. When I arrived, late afternoon sun was sliding down the dunes, carving shadows that looked like waves frozen mid-collapse. There were other campers, a couple with a fifth wheel, a family in a rental RV, but they were spread out, distant. I liked that. I told myself that isolation was peace. As evening crept in, the air shifted. The heat drained fast, leaving a cold that pressed against my skin through my shirt. Sand holds warmth in the day, but at night it gives nothing back. I cooked a simple meal on the camp stove, listening to the wind rake the dunes. It made a sound like breathing, long and uneven. I caught myself matching it without realizing, inhaling when the wind rose, exhaling when it fell. That should have been my first warning, how quickly the place got inside me. After dark, the dunes changed character. Under moonlight, they didn't look soft anymore. They looked sharp, like ridges of bone. I sat on the step of the van with a headlamp off, letting my eyes adjust. The stars were overwhelming, dense and close, like they might spill down if I reached up. Somewhere far off, a sound echoed. Not an animal I recognized. Not exactly a howl. It rose, then broke, like a voice that forgot what it was trying to say. I told myself it was the wind funneling through the dunes. I told myself lots of things. Inside the van, the air smelled faintly of dust and old fabric. Familiar. Safe. I slid the door shut and locked it, even though I rarely did that in campgrounds. The lock made a final, hollow click that felt louder than it should have. I lay back on the bench seat, listening. The sound came again. Closer this time. It wasn't rhythmic, no pattern, just present. Sleep didn't come easy. The temperature dropped more, and the cold crept up from the floor through the thin mattress into my bones. I pulled a blanket tighter and stared at the ceiling. The wind shifted direction, and with it the sound. It almost sounded like footsteps. Almost. Too soft to be on gravel, too deliberate to be the wind alone. At some point, I don't know when, I realized the silence had returned. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that presses on your ears until you notice your own heartbeat. I held my breath, listening harder. That's when I heard it, a knock. Not loud, not aggressive. Just a single, careful tap against the side of the van. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. My mind raced through explanations, another camper, a ranger, someone needing help. But the campground rules were clear. Quiet hours. Rangers didn't knock like that. And whoever it was hadn't said a word. The knock came again. Same spot. Same pressure. As if whoever or whatever was on the other side knew exactly how much force to use to be noticed without being threatening. "Hello?" I called, my voice thin in the enclosed space. No answer. I slid off the bench seat and peered through the curtain covering the side window. The moonlight outside was bright enough to wash the sand pale silver. I saw nothing, no shadow, no movement, just the dunes rising and falling like a frozen ocean. I waited. counted breaths. When nothing happened, I convinced myself I'd imagined it, that the van had settled, that the wind had thrown something against the side. I lay back down, but sleep stayed away, hovering just out of reach. Sometime later, hours or minutes, I couldn't tell, I felt it again. Not a sound this time, a presence. That feeling you get when someone is standing close behind you, even with your eyes closed. The air inside the van felt thicker, like it had weight. Then came the smell. It wasn't animal. It wasn't human. It was dry, sharp, almost metallic, like overheated stone after rain. But there had been no rain. It seeped in through the seams of the van, through cracks I didn't know existed. My stomach turned. I sat up, heart pounding. Outside, something shifted. I cracked the curtain again, just a fraction. At first, I thought it was a trick of light, a shadow where there shouldn't be one, stretching unnaturally across the sand. Then it moved. It stood at the edge of the dunes, far enough away to blur details, close enough that I could see its outline. Too tall to be a child, too thin to be a bear. It didn't walk. It adjusted, like it was figuring out how to hold its own shape. The wind picked up, and with it, the sound, no longer distant. It carried a rhythm now, uneven, almost like speech stripped of language. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe it was a person playing a trick, but nothing about its movement fit. When it shifted, parts of it lagged, like it was remembering itself piece by piece. I pulled back from the window, pulse roaring in my ears. My thoughts scrambled, grasping for logic. Dehydration, altitude, exhaustion. I had been driving all day. The dunes were known for optical illusions. People got disoriented here, lost, hurt. Another knock. This time it came from the back of the van. I froze. Every muscle locked. The smell intensified, burning the back of my throat. I could hear my own breathing now, loud and uneven. The knock came again, followed by something worse, a dragging sound, slow and deliberate like fingers tracing metal, learning its shape. "Go away?" I whispered, not sure who I was talking to or what. Outside, the sound stopped. The silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. I waited, counting heartbeats, telling myself that in the morning I'd laugh about this, that fear does strange things in unfamiliar places. Then I heard my name, not spoken, not shouted, just formed, carried on the wind in a way that didn't belong to it. Ethan. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't distorted. It was perfect. My voice, but emptied of emotion. That was when I knew whatever was out there wasn't lost. It was looking for something, and it had found me. The sound of my name didn't fade the way echoes are supposed to. It stayed, stretched thin across the dunes like the land itself was holding onto it. I pressed my palms against my ears as if that could push the sound back out of my head, but it was already inside me, vibrating behind my eyes. I told myself not to respond. Every instinct screamed that answering would be a mistake, that whatever had learned my name had learned it by listening, by waiting. I stayed still, muscles burning from the effort. The Volkswagen creaked as the temperature dropped again, metal contracting in small, sharp complaints. Each noise made my heart jump. Outside, something moved through the sand. Not footsteps. Those would have had a rhythm, a weight. This was more like the dunes themselves were rearranging, grains sliding in slow, deliberate avalanches. The sound circled the van, never quite close enough to touch, never far enough to ignore. I imagined it tracing my outline through the thin aluminum skin, learning where I slept, where I breathed. Then it stopped. The absence of sound was worse. My mind filled the gap with images I couldn't control. A hand pressed against the window, a face leaning close, features shifting as it tried them on. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, the strange metallic smell still clinging to the air. I reached for my phone, the screen lighting the van in a harsh blue glow. No signal, of course. I turned on the flashlight anyway, pointing it at the door, the windows, anywhere but outside. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, eyes wide, skin pale, a stranger wearing my face. Another voice drifted in, softer this time. "Help me." It came from the dunes, from the direction of the campground road. The tone was wrong, too measured, like someone reciting a line they'd practiced. My chest tightened. I'd heard enough true fear in my life to know when it was real. This wasn't. I stayed silent. The voice tried again, closer now. Please, I'm lost. The smell surged, stronger than before, and with it came a change in temperature. The air inside the van felt colder, as if a door had been opened somewhere. I wrapped my arms around myself, teeth chattering, not sure if it was from the cold or the terror settling deep in my gut. A shadow passed across the front windshield, blotting out the moonlight. It paused there, impossibly still. I could feel it watching, even without seeing eyes. The van rocked slightly, a gentle pressure, like someone leaning their weight against it. I thought of my ex-wife then, of the way she used to say I trusted people too easily, that I always wanted to see the best, even when the warning signs were right there. I'd laughed it off, told her the world wasn't as dangerous as she thought. Lying there in the dark, listening to something pretend to be human, her words came back with brutal clarity. The shadow moved away. The dunes sighed as the wind shifted again, covering tracks as easily as it made them. I waited, counting breaths until my lungs burned. I didn't know how long passed before the first hint of dawn bled into the sky. The stars faded reluctantly, and the dunes softened, their edges less sharp in the growing light. The smell dissipated, leaving the familiar scent of dust and cold air. Birds began to call, tentative at first, then louder, as if testing the morning. I didn't sleep. When the sun finally crested the horizon, I forced myself to move. Every muscle protested as I sat up, joints stiff, head pounding. I opened the van door slowly, half expecting resistance, half expecting something to be waiting on the other side. There was nothing. The campground looked normal, peaceful even. The other RVs sat where they had been the night before. A man walked his dog along the road, nodding at me as if nothing in the world was wrong. I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and that's when I saw the marks. In the sand around the van, there were impressions, not footprints, no heel, no toe. Just long, shallow depressions like something had pressed itself into the dunes and slid. They circled the van, overlapping, confused. In one place near the rear door, the sand was smoothed flat, as if whatever it was had stood there for a long time. I crouched, touching the sand. It was cold, too cold for the early morning sun. A shiver ran through me. I packed up faster than I ever had, hands shaking as I stowed gear, my eyes constantly scanning the dunes. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. What would I say? That the sand had learned my name? That something had tried to wear my voice? As I drove away, the dunes receded in the rearview mirror, rising and falling, beautiful and indifferent. Part of me wanted to believe it was over, that daylight had burned away whatever had stalked me in the dark. But as the park disappeared behind a bend in the road, my phone buzzed. One notification, no signal bar, no sender, just a single word on the screen. Ethan. I pulled over, heart hammering, staring at the glowing letters until they blurred. The dunes were miles behind me now, but the weight of that night pressed just as heavy. I learned something out there, something I carry with me every time I park the van, like every time the night grows too quiet. Some places don't want company, some landscapes listen, and if you stay long enough, alone enough, they start to answer back. The dunes didn't chase me. They didn't need to. They already knew where to find me. I didn't stop driving until the dunes were far enough behind me that the landscape changed its language. Sand gave way to scrub to trees, and still I kept going, hands tight on the wheel, eyes flicking to the mirrors every few seconds. I expected to see something back there, some shape learning how to be a vehicle, how to follow, but the road stayed empty. That should have calmed me. It didn't. Fear like that doesn't burn off all at once. It settles. It embeds itself into small, ordinary moments. The hum of the engine became too steady, like breathing I didn't trust. The smell of warm dust drifting through the vents made my stomach turn. Every time the phone buzzed, service returning in weak, flickering bars, my heart kicked hard against my ribs. No more messages came. That almost felt worse. By late morning, I pulled into a rest area near Alamosa. Other people were there. Families, couples, a trucker asleep in his cab. Laughter drifted across the parking lot. Normal sounds. I sat in the van with the door open, letting the noise wash over me, reminding myself what the world was supposed to feel like. I checked the van for damage. No scratches, no dents, nothing to prove that anything had touched it. Just a faint smear on the rear panel, barely visible unless the light hit it right. I rubbed at it with my thumb. The residue was fine, powdery, sand, but darker than the rest. Almost gray. I wiped my hand on my jeans and stood there longer than I needed to, staring at the van like it might tell me something if I waited. It didn't. It never does. I didn't camp again that night. I drove until exhaustion forced me into a cheap roadside motel, the kind with flickering lights and thin walls. Even there, even with doors that locked and people on either side of me, sleep came in fragments. Every dream was filled with shifting ground, with faces that wouldn't hold their shape. Weeks passed, then months. On the surface, things went back to normal. I returned to work. I smiled when people asked about the trip, gave them the safe version, the stars, the quiet, the beauty of the dunes. I left out the rest. Some stories don't want witnesses, but camping changed after that. I still took the van out, still chased that feeling of space and solitude, but I stopped seeking isolation. I parked closer to others. I kept the radio low at night, just enough human noise to anchor me. I learned the difference between natural silence and the kind that watches you. Every once in a while, though, I'd catch something that pulled me right back there. Wind moving through tall grass in the wrong rhythm. A voice in the distance that sounded almost familiar. Once, in Utah, I woke to the smell of hot stone and metal, sharp and sudden, and I didn't sleep again until sunrise. I started reading folklore, old park ranger accounts, half-forgotten stories buried in forums and local archives. Great sand dunes came up more than once. Stories of lost hikers who followed voices, of tracks that didn't make sense, of figures seen at a distance that never looked the same twice. One account stuck with me. An old ranger interview, decades old. He talked about the dunes like they were a living thing, not alive in the way animals are, but aware. He said the sand moved more at night than it should. That sound carried wrong there. That sometimes if you stayed long enough, the dunes reflected you back to yourself. Distorted. I stopped reading after that. The lesson wasn't about monsters or shapeshifters or anything you could point to and name. It was simpler, harder. Some places don't mean harm, but they don't mean kindness either. They don't care who you are or why you came. They don't recognize loneliness as a weakness or strength. They just respond. I think that's what terrified me the most. Out there, stripped of distractions, of people, of noise, I had been seen. Not the version of myself I show the world, but the quieter one. The man running from an empty house, from conversations that never got finished. The dunes didn't create that fear. They just gave it a voice. I don't know what stood outside my van that night. I don't know if it wore the land like a skin, or if it was something older, something that had always been there, waiting for a name to use. I only know that it knew me well enough to call me out of myself. That kind of knowledge doesn't fade. So if you ever find yourself camping somewhere that feels too quiet, where the wind seems to pause just a second longer than it should, listen to that feeling, not the panic, the warning underneath it. The part of you that knows when you're being observed. Because the wild doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits for you to answer. And once you do, it remembers. I thought distance would dilute it. That time, routine, daylight, and traffic would grind the experience down into something manageable, something that could sit on a shelf in my mind with other bad memories. But fear like that doesn't live on the surface. It sinks, it waits, and it resurfaces when you least expect it, wearing a different face. The first time it came back was months later, in a crowded campground in Arizona. Families everywhere, kids riding bikes, campfires snapping and laughing, the kind of place that should have felt safe by sheer numbers alone. I was washing dishes at the spigot when the wind shifted, bringing with it a dry, mineral smell that didn't belong there. My hands froze in the water. For just a moment, the laughter faded, and all I could hear was sand sliding against itself. I didn't see anything. That was almost worse. I realized then that what followed me from the dunes wasn't a figure. It was awareness. The understanding that the land is not passive, that when you park your RV on it, when you sleep on it, you are not alone in the way you think you are. You are being received or tolerated. I started paying closer attention after that, not in a paranoid way, in a respectful one. I noticed how some places seemed to exhale when night fell, settling into themselves. Others tightened. The air would feel thinner. Sounds would stretch, arriving late or not at all. In those places, I didn't argue with my instincts anymore. I left, even if it meant packing up in the dark, even if it made no rational sense. That was the real change. Before the dunes, I trusted logic over intuition. Afterward, I understood that logic only works where the rules are stable. Out there, in places shaped by wind and time and isolation, the rules are older than reason. A year later, I passed near Great Sand Dunes again. I didn't plan it that way. The road curved, the sign appeared, and suddenly the name was there in bold letters, like had been waiting. My chest tightened. I slowed without meaning to. I didn't turn in. I pulled over instead, far enough away that the dunes were just a pale shape against the horizon. From that distance, they looked harmless, almost gentle. I sat on the hood of the van, engine ticking softly, and watched the light change across them. I felt it then. That pressure. Not fear. Recognition. Like standing across the room from someone you used to know well, someone who remembers things you'd rather forget. The wind moved across the plain, and for a second, just a second, it carried something that sounded like breath shaping itself around a word. Not my name this time. I left before sunset. Some people chase experiences. They want proof of the unknown, of the unexplained, of something bigger than themselves. I understand that urge. I felt it once. But there's a cost to being noticed by places that don't need you, places that don't care whether you leave changed or not. The dunes taught me that the wild isn't a backdrop, it's a participant. And when you strip away the noise of your life, when you sit alone in the dark with nothing but wind and memory, you become audible in ways you're not prepared for. I still camp. I still love the road, the ritual of pulling off somewhere quiet, of stepping out into a night sky untouched by city light. But I don't try to disappear anymore. I make myself known. I keep small lights on. I let sound exist, not as a challenge, but as a boundary. And when the silence presses too hard, when the air feels like it's listening, I don't wait to find out why, because some landscapes don't hunt. They don't chase. They don't need to. They observe. They remember. They reflect. And if you give them enough time, enough stillness, enough of yourself, they'll show you something wearing your own voice. That night at Great Sand Dunes didn't ruin camping for me. It refined it. It taught me humility. It taught me that fear isn't always about danger. It's about recognition, about realizing you're not as invisible as you thought, not as separate from the land beneath you. So if you ever find yourself alone in your RV, parked somewhere vast and quiet, and the night feels a little too aware, trust that feeling. Respect it. Leave if you have to, because the most dangerous thing you can do out there isn't being afraid. It's believing you're alone when you're not. The first sound that night wasn't a knock. It was the feeling that something had noticed me. I didn't know how else to describe it. A pressure in the air, a subtle shift, like the dark itself had leaned closer to the RV and was listening to my breathing. My name is Evan Cole. I was 36 years old in February of 2018, and I had been living on the road for almost 4 years by then. I wasn't new to RV camping. I wasn't reckless either. I grew up in Missouri, spent summers helping my uncle haul trailers across the Midwest, learned early that the land out here doesn't announce its dangers loudly. It whispers them. And if you're not listening, it waits. That night, I was driving west through Iowa, cutting across Interstate 80, pushing longer than I should have. Snow flurries kept drifting in and out of the headlights, not enough to stop travel, just enough to wear you down. The kind of cold that doesn't bite right away. It seeps. I told myself I'd pull over at the next rest stop, sleep a few hours, then finish the drive before sunrise. The rest stop came up just after midnight. It was one of those older Iowa rest areas, wide concrete lot, tall sodium vapor lights humming overhead, my bathroom building sitting back from the road like a bunker. No gas station, no attendant, just vending machines glowing faintly through frosted windows. There were 2 semi-trucks parked far down the lot, engines off, drivers asleep. I pulled my RV into a space near the edge where the light didn't quite reach. I remember thinking, good, quieter. That was my first mistake. I shut off the engine, and the sudden silence pressed in so fast it made my ears ring. No wind. No traffic noise, just the low electrical buzz from the lights and the faint ticking of hot metal cooling. The RV rocked once, settling like a tired animal kneeling. I locked the doors out of habit, pulled the curtains tight, and sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, listening to my own pulse slow down. I told myself this was routine, just another night, just another stop. But something felt off. Not fear, not yet. More like a vague resistance in my chest, as if part of me didn't want to lie down. I ignored it. I always did back then. I believed instincts were just leftover anxiety from a lifetime of moving around, never staying anywhere long enough to feel safe. I moved into the back of the RV, kicked off my boots, and lay down fully clothed. The heater clicked on and off, struggling against the cold. Every time it stopped, the silence felt heavier. That's when I heard the first rattle. Not loud, not violent, just a soft, uneven tapping against the passenger side window. 3 quick ticks, then nothing. I froze. My brain immediately tried to solve it. Ice falling from the roof, contracting metal, small animal brushing against the side. All reasonable, all comforting. Then it happened again, this time closer. Not tapping, testing, like fingertips, light but deliberate, dragging slightly along the glass. I sat up slowly, holding my breath. The RV smelled faintly of propane and stale coffee. My skin prickled with cold where the blanket had slipped. I listened hard, straining for any other sound. Footsteps, voices, wind, anything that would anchor the noise to a cause. There was nothing. I leaned forward and gently parted the curtain by half an inch. The light outside was weak and yellow, throwing long shadows across the snow-dusted pavement. I saw my own reflection first, pale face, eyes too alert, then the empty space beyond it. No one standing there, no movement, just the blank side of the rest stop lot, stretching into darkness. I closed the curtain and told myself to stop being stupid. But the tapping didn't stop. It moved. Not around the RV like someone walking. Slid is the only word that fits. The sound traveled along the side paneling, slow and uneven, rising slightly as it reached the next window. Then came a soft knock. 1, 2, pause, 3. I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't random. I stood up, heart pounding now, and turned on the interior light. The sudden brightness made the RV feel smaller, more exposed, like lighting a match in a cave. I grabbed my phone, checked the time, 12:47 a.m., and pulled up the camera app, pointing it toward the window, even though I knew it wouldn't capture anything through the glare. Another knock. Harder this time. The glass vibrated. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. "You okay out there?" The words felt ridiculous the moment they left my mouth. No response. Instead, the knock repeated. Same pattern, same rhythm. As if whatever was outside had learned it from me, had memorized the space between my breaths. My mind jumped to people, drifters, someone messing with me, someone trying to get me to open the door. That explanation scared me, but it also grounded me. People made sense. People had weight, footsteps, shadows. This had none of that. The knocks began to circle the RV now, appearing on different windows without any sound of movement between them. Rear window, driver's side, back again, each one slightly stronger as if testing how much pressure the glass could take. The RV rocked, just barely, but enough. I backed away, my spine brushing the kitchen counter, and suddenly I was very aware of how thin the walls were. Aluminum and insulation pretending to be shelter. I imagined forces, pressing in from all sides, feeling for weaknesses. The heater shut off again. The cold rushed in, sharp and immediate, and with it came a smell I hadn't noticed before. Damp earth, like thawing soil. Wrong for February. Wrong for concrete and snow. My stomach turned. "Stop," I whispered. Not sure who I was talking to. The knocking stopped all at once. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It felt expectant, patient. I stood there, muscles locked, counting seconds. 10, 20, 30. Then the window beside the bed rattled violently, as if something had slammed into it with its full weight. I yelled then. A raw sound pulled straight from my chest. The RV shuddered, cabinets clinking, curtains swaying. I stumbled forward, gripping the table to stay upright. Outside there was still nothing to see. No footsteps, no figures, no shadows breaking the light, just the sound, again and again, each impact stronger than the last. And in that moment, standing alone in a frozen Iowa rest stop with my RV shaking around me, I finally understood something I'd spent years denying. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to get in. The second impact hit lower, right beneath the window frame, and the sound wasn't hollow anymore. It was dense, like something heavy had collided with the RV and then recoiled. The floor vibrated under my boots. I remember gripping the edge of the dinette so hard my knuckles burned, my body bracing for a force I couldn't see but suddenly believed in with every nerve I had. I didn't think about filming. I didn't think about calling anyone. My phone was still in my hand, screen glowing uselessly, because the truth had finally settled in. There was nothing a camera could capture that would explain this, and no one I could call who could get to me in time. Another slam rattled the rear window, then another. Closer. Faster. The pattern was gone now. No rhythm, no testing taps. Whatever restraint existed before had dissolved into urgency. The RV lurched slightly, suspension groaning, as if something had thrown its weight against the side and stayed there for a fraction of a second too long. I shouted again, not words, just noise, hoping human sound might reclaim the space. My voice echoed strangely inside the RV, swallowed too quickly by the insulation. Outside, there was no response. Not even an echo back. I forced myself to move. Standing still felt like surrender. I went to the driver's seat, hands shaking as I reached for the keys hanging by a thin loop. The idea was simple. Start the engine, turn on the headlights, draw attention, scare it, or them, off. I slid into the seat, heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, and turned the key. The engine coughed once, then nothing. The silence snapped back like a trap. A pounding struck the driver's side window so hard I flinched away from the glass. The curtain jumped. I could see the fabric bow inward slightly, like something had pressed against it from the outside. I stared at that spot, frozen, my breath shallow and fast. "Please," I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could stop it. That was when the sound changed. No more impacts. Instead, there came a slow, deliberate scrape along the side of the RV. Not nails, not metal. Something broad, heavy, dragging with intention as if tracing the outline of my shelter. The sound traveled from the front to the back, rising and falling with the seams of the paneling. It stopped directly behind me. I could feel it there, not as a presence I could see, but as pressure. The air inside the RV felt thicker, harder to breathe. The smell of damp earth grew stronger, mixed now with something metallic like old pennies held too long in a closed fist. My mind betrayed me then, offering images I didn't ask for. Not monsters, not shapes, just weight, mass, something that didn't need form to exist. The bathroom door creaked softly as the RV shifted. I spun around, pulse spiking, expecting to see it swinging open. It didn't move, but the light above the sink flickered once, twice, then steadied. I hadn't touched a switch. Another scrape, this one higher, the roof. Something moved across the top of the RV, slow enough that I could follow it by sound alone. The fiberglass groaned faintly under the pressure. Snow slid off in a soft rush, pattering to the ground. I ducked instinctively, heart slamming into my ribs. The semi-trucks at the far end of the lot sat dark and silent. No engines starting, no doors opening, no help coming. I realized then that I hadn't heard a single animal sound since I'd parked. No birds, no distant dogs, Even the highway noise felt muted, as if the world had drawn back a few steps and left me alone in a pocket of wrongness. The heater kicked on suddenly, blasting hot air that smelled burnt and stale. I nearly cried from the shock of it. The noise felt intrusive, too loud, like it might anger whatever was outside. As if in response, the entire RV shuddered violently. This time it wasn't one point of impact, it was everywhere at once. Windows rattled in their frames. Cabinets popped open. The side mirror slammed inward with a crack that made my stomach drop. I screamed and curled forward, arms over my head, bracing for glass to shatter. But it didn't. Instead, everything stopped. No scraping, no pounding, no movement. Just the hum of the heater and my own ragged breathing. I stayed like that for a long time, crouched in the driver's seat, waiting for the next blow. My muscles burned from tension. Sweat trickled down my spine despite the cold. Slowly, painfully, I lifted my head. Nothing had changed. The curtains hung still. The windows were intact. The lot outside remained empty. And that's when a new fear took root, quieter, colder than the panic that came before. What if it wasn't gone? What if it was waiting? I thought about staying put until morning, but the idea made my chest tighten. Daylight suddenly felt impossibly far away. Every second stretched thick and heavy, and the thought of enduring hours more of this, of it choosing when to return, was unbearable. I tried the ignition again. This time, the engine turned over. The sound was deafening, glorious, almost painful in its normalcy. I sobbed once, just a single broken sound, then slammed the headlights on. The beams cut across the lot, stark and white, exposing nothing but snow and concrete. I didn't hesitate. I threw the RV into drive and hit the gas harder than I ever had in a parking lot. The tires slipped briefly, then caught. As I sped toward the exit, something struck the back of the RV one last time. Not enough to stop me, but enough to be felt. A final reminder. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down until the rest stop lights disappeared in my mirrors and the highway noise returned, loud and alive. Even then, I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see something pacing me in the dark, matching my speed without headlights. Nothing followed. I drove until dawn. When the sun finally broke over the flat Iowa fields, pale and cold, I pulled into a crowded truck stop and sat there shaking, watching people move around like the world had never held its breath. I inspected the RV later. No dents, no scratches, no marks of any kind. Just the broken side mirror, snapped cleanly inward as if hit by something solid and focused. I never stayed overnight at a rest stop again after that, not once. Because some places aren't empty the way we think they are. Some places don't need shapes or faces to make themselves known. And some warnings don't come as sights, but as pressure, as sound, as the instinct we spend too much of our lives trying to ignore. That night taught me to listen, even when I don't want to hear. I thought leaving the rest stop behind would be the end of it. That once the sun came up and the noise of the world returned, diesel engines, coffee machines hissing, doors slamming, the night would fold itself away like a bad dream. I told myself fear had exaggerated everything, that exhaustion had bent my senses, that my mind had filled in the gaps where reason failed. That lie worked for a while. But fear doesn't always stay where it's born. Sometimes it rides with you, quiet and patient, waiting for stillness. In the weeks after Iowa, I noticed small changes in myself. I stopped parking near tree lines. I avoided rest stops entirely, even in daylight. I started sleeping with the interior lights on, the curtains cracked just enough that I could see shadows before they moved. I told myself it was about safety, about people. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. What unsettled me most wasn't what happened that night. It was how my body remembered it. Every time the RV creaked as it cooled, my shoulders tensed. Every time wind brushed against the side paneling, my heart jumped. Once, parked in Nebraska, a flock of geese landed nearby in the dark, and the sound of their wings scraping the air sent me into a full panic. Hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys. I was losing trust in my own instincts, because they no longer warned me before something happened. They reacted afterward, too late, too loud. I kept moving. That was always my solution. Motion as medicine, miles as denial. By early spring, I found myself in Wisconsin, camping at a small private campground near the edge of a frozen lake. It was quiet. Too quiet. But it was cheap, and I told myself I needed to face the silence again or risk letting it own me. That first night, nothing happened. The second night, I slept badly but undisturbed. On the third night, the temperature dropped hard after sunset. The RV groaned as it adjusted, the sound sharp and sudden in the still air. I sat at the dinette, drinking lukewarm coffee, listening to the ice shift beneath the lake's surface. The sound traveled upward through the ground, a deep, hollow moan that made my teeth ache. Then I heard it. 3 soft taps, not on the RV, on the picnic table outside. My stomach turned cold. The rhythm was wrong, too familiar, too precise. I stayed very still, barely breathing, counting the seconds between the sounds. They came again, 3 taps, evenly spaced, like knuckles on wood. I told myself it was contracting lumber, temperature change, normal campground noises, but I didn't believe it. I stood slowly, every movement deliberate, and peeked through the curtain. The picnic table sat empty under the moonlight, its surface dusted with frost. No animals, no people, no wind strong enough to move anything. Another tap. This time, closer to the RV, not on the wall, on the step. The sound traveled up through the metal, straight into my bones. I backed away, my mind screaming me to leave, to run, to never stop moving again. But another voice pushed back, quiet, stubborn, and dangerous. You can't keep running. That internal conflict between survival and stubborn pride nearly cost me everything. I opened the door, just a crack. Enough to let cold air pour in, sharp and biting. The campground smelled like ice and pine and something else underneath, damp, mineral, ancient. "Hello?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt. The darkness outside didn't answer, but it shifted, not visibly, not in a way I could point to. The space beyond the door felt heavier, like the air itself leaned toward me, curious. I slammed the door shut, heart racing, and locked it. Immediately, the RV rocked once, hard enough to make the cabinets rattle. Not a blow, a warning. I collapsed against the door, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor, breath coming in shallow gasps. Tears burned my eyes, not from fear alone, but from the realization that whatever I'd encountered in Iowa hadn't been tied to that place. It had been aware of me. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I packed up and left without saying a word to the campground owner. I drove until the lake was a memory and the trees thinned into farmland. I never heard the taps again after that. But sometimes, late at night, when the RV settles and the world goes quiet, I still feel it. The pressure, that sense of being noticed. The lesson wasn't about monsters or ghosts or things that go bump in the night. It was about respect. The land isn't empty just because we can't see what occupies it. Silence isn't safety, and movement doesn't always mean escape. Now, when I camp, I choose places with people nearby. With light, with noise. I listen when my instincts speak, even if they don't make sense yet. Because some forces don't chase, they wait. And the worst thing you can do is teach them you're willing to ignore the warning. The first thing that unsettled me wasn't the dark. It was how quiet the dark felt, like the land itself was holding its breath and waiting for me to do something wrong. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I was 41 years old in September of 2023, and I'd been RV camping across the United States for almost a decade by then. I wasn't new to isolation. I wasn't new to strange nights or uneasy sounds or the way your thoughts grow louder when there's no city noise to drown them out. I'd slept through desert windstorms in Arizona, listened to bears move just outside my rig in Montana, and once woke up to a man standing far too close to my door in a Nevada rest stop, staring like he'd forgotten why he was there. But Gettysburg was different from the moment I crossed into Pennsylvania. I was driving my old Volkswagen camper, a faded blue '89 that had more miles than sense, but she'd never let me down. There's something intimate about a VW camper. You're not sealed off from the world the way you are in a modern RV. You hear more. You feel more. The walls don't insulate you from your thoughts or from the land you're parked on. I chose the campground because it was quiet, a little off the main road, bordered by trees that leaned inward like they were listening. The reviews online were neutral. Peaceful. Close to history. That word, history, showed up a lot. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was early evening when I pulled in. The sky was already dimming, that soft gray blue that settles over Pennsylvania in the fall, and the air smelled damp, metallic, like wet leaves and old iron. I remember thinking the smell reminded me of pennies rubbed between your fingers. The kind of scent that doesn't belong to any single thing but to time itself. I parked, leveled the camper, shut off the engine, and just sat there for a moment longer than usual. That was the first denial. My instincts had started whispering, and I chose not to listen. I told myself I was tired, that the long drive had my nerves stretched thin. Gettysburg is famous for its ghosts, sure, but I'd always considered that more folklore than threat. Stories told to tourists, lantern-lit walking tours, theatrical pauses at grave markers, history repackaged into something safe. I stepped outside, boots crunching softly against gravel, and the quiet pressed in immediately. No distant highway hum, no laughter from neighboring sites, just trees, tall and dark, and the low sound of wind brushing through leaves that were already turning brittle. As the light faded, the temperature dropped faster than expected. The cold didn't creep, it arrived. Sharp. Sudden. It slid under my jacket and sat against my skin like a warning. I cooked dinner quickly, barely tasting it. Every sound felt amplified. The scrape of metal, the hiss of the stove, the way my own breathing sounded too loud in my ears. When night finally took over, it did so completely. No half-light, no glow from nearby campers, just darkness so thick it felt textured. That was when I saw the first lantern. It was faint, distant, just a warm, flickering glow weaving between the trees beyond the edge of the campground. My first thought was practical. Another camper out for a walk, maybe a ranger doing rounds. Lanterns aren't unusual. What was unusual was the way it moved. It didn't bob like someone walking. It glided. I stood there longer than I should have, watching that light drift slowly through the woods, never getting closer, never getting farther away, just pacing the tree line like it was following a boundary only it could see. I felt stupid for being unsettled. So I rationalized. Reenactors, I thought. Gettysburg attracts them year-round. Lanterns, period clothing, late-night walks to feel connected to the past. It made sense. Too much sense. Enough to quiet the whisper in my chest. I went inside the camper and locked the door. Sleep didn't come easily. The cold seeped through the floor, and the air inside felt stale, heavy with that same metallic smell. At some point, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, measured, gravel crunching, then stopping, then starting again. I told myself it was someone walking their dog. Then came the sound that shifted everything. A soft knock, not loud, not demanding, just 3 gentle taps against the side of the van like someone testing whether I was awake. I froze. My mind raced through explanations faster than my heart could keep up. Ranger, camper needing help, lost tourist, but my body didn't believe any of them. My skin prickled, every nerve screaming, "Don't move." I didn't answer. The knock didn't come again. Minutes passed, or hours. Time stopped behaving normally. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds outside change. The footsteps resumed, but now there were more of them, not heavier. Just multiplied, moving in slow circles around my camper. No voices, no coughing, no human noise at all. Then the smell changed. It was subtle but unmistakable. Oil and smoke, old flame residue, like a lantern that's been burning too long without fresh fuel. The air felt warmer near the windows, as if heat was passing just outside the glass. I forced myself to look. Through the small rear window, I saw them. 3 figures, standing just beyond the edge of the campground light. They wore long coats that hung wrong on their frames, too still despite the wind. Each held a lantern. The glass panes clouded and yellowed, flames flickering unevenly inside. They weren't facing me. They were facing outward toward the woods, as if guarding something, or waiting. The dread didn't hit all at once. It spread slowly, like ink through water. My mind tried one last time to rationalize. Actors, night hikers, people messing around. But then one of them turned. Its movement was stiff, delayed, like a marionette pulled by unfamiliar strings. I couldn't see a face, just darkness beneath the brim of what might have been a hat. The lantern in its hand lifted slightly, and for a moment the light swept across my camper. The beam lingered on the door. That's when panic finally broke through denial. My chest tightened, breath shallow and fast, and I realized something that made my stomach drop. These figures weren't wandering. They were checking, moving from site to site, pausing, observing, choosing. The lantern light slid away and the figures moved on, drifting deeper into the trees. The sounds faded, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. I didn't sleep at all that night. When morning came, the campground looked normal, empty, peaceful, like nothing had happened. No footprints, no soot, no smell, just damp leaves and cold air. At the ranger station later that morning, I mentioned the lanterns casually, trying to sound calm. The man behind the counter didn't smile, didn't laugh. He just asked, very quietly, "How close did they get to your vehicle?" That was the moment I knew this wasn't my imagination, and that I'd made a mistake staying another night. He didn't wait for my answer. The ranger's eyes stayed on me, steady and unreadable, like he already knew exactly what I was going to say and was bracing for it anyway. Behind him, the small office smelled of old coffee and damp paper, the kind of place where time piles up instead of moving on. A map of the park hung crooked on the wall, corners curling, edges darkened by fingerprints. "Close enough to knock," I finally said. That did it. He exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, then reached for a clipboard I hadn't noticed before. His fingers hesitated for half a second before he wrote something down. Not fast, not slow, deliberate. "You're not the first this month," he said, still not looking at me, "and you won't be the last." I felt my mouth go dry. "So, reenactors?" He shook his head once. Not a dramatic gesture, almost tired. "Reenactors don't come out after midnight," he said, "and they don't walk through restricted woodland." Something in my chest tightened. Restricted because of what? This time he looked up, really looked at me. The kind of look that weighs how much truth someone can handle. "Because people don't always come back the same," he said. I laughed. A short, sharp sound that didn't belong to me. "Come on. You're telling me lanterns walk around the woods and, what, haunt campers?" The ranger's jaw clenched. "I'm telling you Gettysburg isn't just a battlefield. It's a wound, and wounds don't close cleanly." Silence settled between us, thick and uncomfortable. I thought about leaving right then, packing up, driving until the trees thinned and the air felt ordinary again. But another feeling pushed back against the fear: stubbornness. The same stubbornness that had kept me on the road for 10 years, that had taught me not to spook easy, not to run at the first strange sound. "How long have you been seeing them?" I asked. "Longer than I've worked here," he said, "longer than the park's been fenced." He slid a pamphlet across the counter, not a ghost tour flyer, not a warning notice, just a simple sheet listing campground rules. Quiet hours, fire safety, curfew. At the bottom, handwritten in block letters, "Do not follow lights after dark." I stayed another night. That decision still sits heavy in my chest when I think about it. Not because I didn't know better, but because part of me wanted proof. I wanted to see them again. To understand what I'd almost convinced myself wasn't real. I moved my camper to a different site, closer to the tree line this time, telling myself it was coincidence, convenience. The truth was darker. I wanted proximity. I wanted answers. The day dragged. Clouds hung low, muting sound, pressing down on the land. Even the birds were quiet. When dusk arrived, it felt like the world dimmed all at once, as if someone had turned a dial instead of flipping a switch. I prepared carefully. Doors locked, windows cracked just enough to hear. Lights off inside the camper. I sat in the driver's seat, hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling ridiculous and alert all at once. Night came. Then the smell returned. Oil, smoke, something old and burned into memory. It seeped in through the vents, thickening the air, coating my tongue. My stomach rolled. I hadn't lit anything. No one nearby had either. That's when I heard the first footstep. Not gravel this time. Leaves, slow, intentional. Crunch, pause, crunch. I leaned forward, heart hammering, eyes straining through the windshield. The trees swayed gently, shadows folding over each other, until a light bloomed between them. Then another. Then another. 5 lanterns this time. They emerged one by one, figures attached like afterthoughts. Their movements were wrong, too synchronized, too restrained. They walked in a loose line, lanterns held low, flames guttering like they were fighting against something heavier than wind. I noticed details I'd missed the first night. The way their boots didn't disturb the ground as much as they should. The way the light didn't cast shadows correctly, bending where it should fall straight. The way the air around them seemed thicker, colder, even as the lanterns burned. They stopped, all at once, every lantern lifted in unison. The beams swept the campground slowly, methodically, pausing on empty sites, sliding over picnic tables, lingering on tents that had long since been packed away. Then one lantern turned toward me. The light crept across my camper inch by inch until it reached the windshield. I shrank back instinctively, pulse roaring in my ears. The beam pressed against the glass, warm and cold at the same time, like it couldn't decide what it was. Behind the lantern, the figure leaned closer. I saw a face then, or something shaped like one. Skin pale and taut, eyes too dark, mouth set in a line that felt unfinished, like an expression interrupted centuries ago and never corrected. It raised a hand and knocked, not on the door, on the windshield. The sound cracked through me, sharp, intimate. Wrong. I gasped before I could stop myself. The sound loud in the sealed silence of the van. The figure froze, all of them did. Every lantern swung toward my camper at once, their light converging, flooding the interior with a sickly yellow glow. The smell intensified, choking, and I felt heat against my skin as if the flames were inches away. Panic took over. I twisted the key, engine roaring to life, far louder than I expected. The sound shattered the stillness, echoing through the trees. The figures didn't scatter. They didn't react at all. They just watched. I slammed the headlights on. For a split second, the beams cut through the lantern light, and the figures vanished. Not faded. Not retreated. Gone. I didn't wait. I threw the camper into gear and drove. Gravel sprayed. Branches scraped the sides. I didn't care where the road led as long as it led away. In the rearview mirror, lantern lights flickered between the trees, keeping pace far longer than they should have been able to. They didn't chase. They followed, patient, certain. It wasn't until I hit the main road, asphalt humming under my tires, that the lights finally disappeared. I didn't stop driving until sunrise. I pulled over at a rest area miles away, hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. When I finally stepped outside, the air smelled normal again, diesel, wet pavement, nothing ancient or burned. I thought it was over. I was wrong. Because even in the daylight, even far from Gettysburg, I could still see lantern light when I closed my eyes. Still hear that knock. Still feel the weight of being chosen and spared without understanding why. And the worst part, the part I haven't told many people, is this. When I checked the windshield later, there was a handprint on the glass, charred, perfect, as if pressed there from the other side of time. I stayed on the road for hours after that, long after the sky turned pale and the sun climbed high enough to feel unreal, like a stage light switching on too early. Even daylight didn't feel safe. It felt thin, exposed, as if whatever had watched me the night before could still see through it. I pulled into a truck stop outside Harrisburg sometime mid-morning. The place was loud. Diesel engines idling, doors slamming, voices calling out over the hiss of air brakes. And I needed that noise more than I needed rest. Sound anchored me. It reminded me I was still in the present. Inside the camper, everything smelled wrong. Not smoke exactly, but something scorched and old, like fabric pulled too close to a flame and saved at the last second. I opened every window, every vent, let the wind tear through the space. Still the smell clung. It had soaked into the upholstery, the curtains, maybe into me. I finally slept for an hour, maybe 2. When I woke, my heart was racing, my mouth dry, my hands curled into fists I didn't remember making. I dreamed of walking through trees with a lantern in my hand, following others who never turned to look at me, no matter how badly I wanted them to. In the dream, I knew I didn't belong with them, but I also knew I couldn't stop walking. I left the truck stop and headed west, putting distance between myself and Gettysburg without a plan beyond a way. I told myself the worst was over, that fear always stretches moments larger than they are, that exhaustion warps perception. Then the radio cut out. Not static, not interference, just silence, like the sound had been swallowed whole. I tapped the dial, switched stations. Nothing. My phone showed full signal, but no audio would play. No music, no podcasts, no voices. The quiet returned. That was when I noticed the temperature dropping again. The sun was still out, bright and indifferent, but inside the camper, the air cooled sharply. My breath fogged faintly in front of my mouth. The smell came back all at once, oil, smoke, old fire. I pulled over hard, tires squealing slightly, heart pounding as I threw the van into park. I scanned the road behind me. There were no trees close by, no battlefield, no campground, just asphalt, fields, sky. And in the reflection of my side mirror, for just a second too long, I saw a lantern glowing in the back window. I spun around. Nothing. The back of the camper was empty, bathed in sunlight. I sat there shaking, laughter bubbling up again, sharp and hysterical. "You're done," I said out loud. "You're tired. You're letting it follow you because you won't let it go." I didn't realize how true that was yet. I spent the next few weeks driving differently. No remote campgrounds, no wooded sites. I stayed where there were lights, people, movement. I avoided history-heavy places, battlefields, cemeteries. I stopped telling myself I was chasing freedom on the road and admitted I was hiding. But the lanterns didn't disappear. Sometimes I saw them reflected in windows that didn't face the outdoors. Sometimes I caught the smell in places it didn't belong, restrooms, grocery stores, crowded parking lots. Once, late at night in a Walmart lot in Ohio, I heard that knock again, soft, polite, 3 taps on the side of the van. I didn't answer. The worst part wasn't the fear anymore. It was the guilt. Because as the weeks passed, I started remembering things I couldn't explain. Images that didn't feel like imagination. A line of men walking through smoke. Boots soaked dark, hands stiff with cold, clutching lanterns not to see the way forward, but to be seen by each other in the chaos. I felt exhaustion that wasn't mine, that dread that didn't belong to my life. Gettysburg wasn't haunting me, I realized. It was reminding me. I finally stopped running in late October outside a small town in West Virginia. The campground was modest, clean, ordinary, no history tours, no monuments, just a place to rest. I parked, shut off the engine, and sat with the silence instead of fighting it. That night, the lanterns came one last time. They didn't surround me. They didn't knock. They stood at the edge of the campground, just beyond the reach of the lights, watching, waiting. I stepped outside. The air was cold but clean. No smoke, no oil, just leaves and earth. My legs trembled as I walked a few steps closer, heart pounding so hard I thought it might split my ribs. "I see you," I said, voice shaking. "I know you're there." The lanterns flickered. "I don't belong to you," I continued, "and you don't belong here anymore." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one figure stepped forward, its lantern lifted, not toward me, but upward, illuminating its own face fully for the first time. There was no menace there, just loss. Understanding washed over me then, heavy and sudden. They weren't hunters. They weren't choosing victims. They were reenacting something unfinished, pacing the edges of camps and roads the way they once paced battle lines, looking for order in chaos, for something familiar to anchor them. And I had wandered too close, too open, too willing to rationalize what my instincts warned me against. "I'll remember," I said quietly. "I won't forget you, but I won't follow." The lantern light dimmed. One by one, the figures turned, not toward the woods, but away, dissolving into darkness that felt finally at rest. The cold lifted. The smell faded. The night returned to normal sounds, insects, wind, distant traffic. They never came back. I still travel in my Volkswagen. I still camp, but I listen now. When the land feels heavy, I leave. When silence presses too hard, I don't stay to prove something to myself. Because some places don't want company. They want witnesses. And if you're not careful, if you ignore that quiet unease and push past the warnings, you might find yourself walking with a lantern one night, searching for a way back that no longer exists. The first thing that unsettled me wasn't the lights, it was the silence that came just before them. A silence so complete it felt like the forest had inhaled and forgotten how to breathe. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I was 38 years old that summer, living out of a weathered Volkswagen camper van I'd rebuilt with my own hands over nearly a decade. I wasn't running from anything dramatic, no failed marriage, no debt chasing me down the highway. I camped because motion kept my thoughts quiet, and the road still made sense when people didn't. I'd spent most of my adult life roaming the western United States, but Mount Hood had always pulled at me in a way I couldn't fully explain. Maybe it was the way the mountain watched you back. Maybe it was the way locals spoke about it, not with fear exactly, but with a kind of cautious respect, like you might talk about a neighbor who smiles politely but never invites you inside. It was August 2020 when I parked my van at a dispersed campsite just off a narrow Forest Service road on the mountain's northern slope. No hookups, no cell service, just a small clearing, tall firs, volcanic rock under my boots, and a faint smell of sap and cold earth even in the late summer heat. I remember thinking it felt older there, not just untouched, aware. I told myself that was romantic nonsense. I'd been on the road too long. Isolation does that to your head. You start assigning intention to landscapes as if the land itself is capable of noticing you. I laughed it off, brewed coffee on my propane stove, and settled into the kind of evening routine that had kept me safe for years. Check tires, lock doors, scan the tree line once, then again, just to be sure. There were other campers nearby. Not close enough to see, but I could hear them. Voices drifting through the trees, the clink of metal, the occasional laugh. That comforted me. It's harder for fear to take hold when you know other people exist in the dark. By dusk, a low fog began rolling in, thin at first, curling around tree trunks like smoke that hadn't decided which direction to go. The temperature dropped fast. Mountain Hood does that. Daylight warmth vanishing the moment the sun slips behind the ridgeline. I pulled on a jacket and stepped outside my van, letting the quiet press against my ears. That's when the forest went still. No insects. No wind. Even the distant campers fell silent as if someone had flipped a switch. I remember standing there with my mug halfway to my mouth, listening for something, anything, to prove the world hadn't paused. Then I saw the first light. It hovered low between the trees, maybe 50 yards out. Soft white, almost pearlescent, not bright enough to illuminate anything around it, but unmistakably there. It didn't flicker like a flashlight or glow like a lantern. It pulsed, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I froze. My rational brain immediately went to the obvious explanations. Headlamp, drone, some kind of LED toy. But the longer I watched, the harder those explanations became to hold on to. The light wasn't moving the way a person moves. It drifted, sideways, then slightly up, then stopped altogether, as if waiting. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear yet, more like the early warning before fear, a subtle internal alarm I'd learned to ignore over the years. I told myself I was tired, that the fog was playing tricks on depth perception. Then a second light appeared. This one higher, dimmer, blue-tinged like moonlight filtered through ice. It emerged silently from behind a tree, and the two lights hovered there together, suspended at different heights, not interacting, but undeniably connected. I whispered, "Nope," under my breath, the word barely leaving my lips. That should have been my cue to get inside the van, lock the doors, and let the night pass. I knew that. I teach that instinct now when people ask me about staying safe on the road. But something held me there. Curiosity, maybe, or pride, or the stubborn refusal to believe that the world still had the capacity to surprise me in ways I couldn't explain. The lights began to move. Not away, not toward me, sideways, gliding between the trees, weaving through branches without disturbing a single needle. A third light flickered on, this one amber, warmer, closer to the ground. The three formed a loose triangle, drifting deeper into the fog. That's when the smell hit me. Ozone. Sharp, metallic, like the air right before a lightning strike, but the sky was clear. No storm, no clouds. Just that smell creeping into my nose, making my scalp prickle. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The sudden vibration made me flinch hard enough to spill coffee down my sleeve. I yanked it out, heart racing, only to see the screen flicker and go black. No battery warning, no shutdown animation, just dead. At the same moment, every light in my van cut out. Interior LEDs, dashboard glow. Even the small solar indicator by the door winked off like it had never existed. The forest didn't react. No birds startled, no wind kicked up. The fog thickened, swallowing the lights until they were nothing more than faint halos pressing against the dark. That was the moment denial stopped working. I felt exposed, standing there with nothing but a jacket and a half-spilled mug, surrounded by trees that suddenly seemed much closer than they had a minute ago. My van, usually a place of safety, looked fragile. Thin metal, glass windows. No barrier at all if something decided to test it. I climbed inside and locked the doors, my hands shaking just enough to annoy me. I told myself to breathe, to think. Power outages happen, electronics fail. Lights in the woods have explanations, even if you don't know them yet. But as I sat there in the dark, nose filled with that electric smell, I realized something else had gone missing. The distant campers. No voices, no laughter, no footsteps. It was as if every other human presence on that mountain had been erased, leaving only me, my van, and whatever was drifting silently through the fog outside. Then came the sound, a low hum, barely audible at first, vibrating through the ground more than the air. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't natural. It felt intentional, like something tuning itself, testing a frequency, searching for resonance. The hum grew stronger. The van trembled, not violently, just enough for me to feel it through the soles of my boots. The cabinets rattled softly. My breath caught in my throat as the realization settled in that this wasn't something I could wait out comfortably. Whatever was happening wasn't passing by. It was settling in, and deep down, beneath the fear and the rationalizations, a quieter thought surfaced, one I didn't want to acknowledge. What if the lights weren't just seen? What if they were looking? The hum deepened until it no longer felt like sound at all, but pressure. Something pressing gently yet persistently against my chest, my ears, my thoughts. It reminded me of standing too close to high-voltage lines as a kid, that uneasy awareness that your body knows something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. I stayed perfectly still inside the van, afraid that movement might somehow announce me. The windows had fogged from the temperature drop, turning the outside world into a blurred smear of shadow and pale gray. I wiped a small circle clear with my sleeve and pressed my forehead close to the glass. That's when I saw the lights again. They were closer now, not rushing, not stalking, just nearer, as if distance had stopped mattering. The white orb hovered at eye level, just beyond the edge of the clearing. The blue one floated higher, threading slowly between branches that should have snagged it. The amber light skimmed low along the ground, its glow revealing nothing beneath it. No footprints, no grass bending, no disturbance at all. My pulse hammered so loud I was convinced it would carry through the glass. I told myself not to anthropomorphize them. They weren't eyes, they weren't entities. They were unexplained phenomena, and unexplained didn't mean dangerous. I repeated that silently like a mantra, the way some people recite prayers when they don't quite believe but hope it helps anyway. Then the white light shifted just slightly and angled toward the van. Every nerve in my body went rigid. The hum changed pitch, rising a fraction enough to make my teeth ache. The smell of ozone intensified, crawling down the back of my throat, coating my tongue with the taste of metal. I realized my hands were clenched so tightly my nails had bitten into my palms. "Okay," I whispered, the word sounding small and useless in the enclosed space. "Okay." I reached for the ignition, thinking maybe I could start the engine, flood the clearing with headlights, reassert some kind of human dominance over the dark. My fingers wrapped around the key. Nothing happened. No click, no churn, no dashboard lights. The van was dead in a way I'd never experienced before. Not broken, not drained, emptied. Like something had reached in and removed the concept of electricity altogether. Outside, the amber orb stopped moving. It hovered inches above the ground near the front of the van, its glow spreading just enough to outline the tires. I watched, frozen, as the rubber slowly darkened, like it was absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. The hum vibrated through the steering wheel, through my ribs, into my skull. That's when panic finally broke through. Not the cinematic kind, no screaming, no sudden action, just a cold, spreading certainty that I was no longer in control of the situation and that whatever rules I'd relied on for safety no longer applied. I thought about the other campers, about how sound carries strangely in forests, how easy it is to misjudge distance. Maybe they were still there, maybe they were watching this too, or maybe they weren't. A new sound joined the hum, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first I thought it was inside the van, something loose vibrating against metal, but then it repeated, slower this time, and I realized it was coming from outside. Tap, pause, tap, not on the door, not on the window, underneath. My stomach dropped. The tapping traveled along the underside of the van, deliberate, methodical, as if something were tracing its shape from below. Each contact sent a faint tremor through the floor, up my legs. I pulled my feet onto the bench instinctively, a useless gesture, but one I couldn't stop myself from making. Stop, I whispered, though I didn't know who or what I was talking to. The white orb pulsed brighter. Images flickered at the edges of my vision, impressions rather than thoughts. A sensation of being measured, not physically, evaluated, like a presence brushing against my awareness, not intruding. Just sampling. My ears rang, the hum spiked, then dropped suddenly, plunging the clearing into a silence so abrupt it felt violent. The lights froze midair, perfectly still, and then all at once everything went black. True darkness. Not night darkness, absence. I couldn't see my hands inches from my face. The fog, the trees, the lights, all gone. The silence pressed in so hard it made me dizzy. For a moment I wondered if I'd gone blind. Then I heard breathing. Not mine. It was close, too close, shallow, uneven, coming from somewhere just outside the van. I held my breath, lungs burning, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. The breathing stopped. A second passed. Then another. A shape moved against the darkness, no light, no outline, just a sense of mass shifting where nothing should be. I felt the van dip slightly as if weight had been placed against it. That was it. Instinct finally overpowered paralysis. I reached for the emergency hatch above the cab, fingers fumbling for the latch I'd never needed before. My mind screamed at me that leaving the van was insane, that whatever was outside had already shown it could move anywhere it wanted. But staying felt worse. The latch popped free with a loud crack that echoed in the void. I shoved the hatch open and cold air rushed in, sharp and clean, washing away the metallic smell. Above me, stars burned bright and indifferent. The sky, suddenly, impossibly normal. I hauled myself up and out, scraping my knee on the edge, not caring about the pain. The moment my boots hit the roof, the darkness below fractured, fog snapping back into place, trees reappearing like scenery dropped back onto a stage. The lights were gone. No orbs, no hum, no tapping. Power snapped back on all at once. My van's headlights flared, interior lights blazing so suddenly I had to shield my eyes. In the distance, I heard voices again, campers laughing, a radio playing faintly, the world stitching itself back together as if nothing had happened. I stood there on the roof, shaking, heart hammering, trying to make sense of the abrupt return to normalcy. That's when I noticed the marks. 3 shallow impressions in the dirt around the van, arranged in a loose triangle. Not footprints, not tracks, just depressions, smooth and perfectly circular, as if something heavy had rested there without touching the ground. I climbed down slowly, dread settling into my bones, and reached out to touch one. The soil was warm, too warm for a mountain night. I didn't stay at Mount Hood after that. I didn't pack carefully. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just drove, tires crunching over gravel, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, until the mountain disappeared in my rearview mirror. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that whatever those lights were, they didn't malfunction. They finished. And sometimes when the world goes quiet in just the wrong way, when the air smells sharp and the forest seems to lean in, I wonder if Mount Hood remembers me, if it's waiting. I didn't realize how deeply that night followed me until weeks later, when I woke up in a campground 3 states away with the taste of metal in my mouth and the certainty that something had been standing just outside my van, only to open the door and find nothing there but dawn and dew-soaked grass. At first, I told myself I'd shaken it off. I'm good at that. Years on the road teach you how to compartmentalize fear, how to fold it neatly and store it under practical explanations. Stress, fatigue, isolation. August 2020 was a strange time for everyone. The world was already unsteady. Why shouldn't my mind be too? But Mount Hood didn't stay behind when I left. It traveled with me in subtler ways. In how silence no longer felt neutral, in how my body reacted before my thoughts whenever electronics failed or the air grew too still. I started noticing patterns, moments when the forest felt attentive, not hostile, not welcoming, just aware. Those moments always carried the same sensory warnings, a pressure behind the eyes, a faint ringing in my ears, that sharp electric smell lingering where it shouldn't. I stopped camping near power lines, then near old volcanic ranges, then near anywhere locals hesitated before answering questions. The road narrowed. What unsettled me most wasn't fear for my own safety. It was the creeping suspicion that the night at Mount Hood hadn't been random, that it had been a kind of interaction, however brief. Not an attack, not a warning, an assessment. The idea made my skin crawl because it implied intention without malice, curiosity without empathy. I'd always believed the wilderness was indifferent, beautiful because it didn't care whether you lived or died. That belief had been comforting, clean, honest. Mount Hood complicated it. I began asking questions in small towns, careful not to sound like a conspiracy theorist or a drunk chasing campfire legends. I framed it as curiosity, as storytelling. People are more open when they think you're collecting folklore instead of truth. An older ranger near government camp didn't laugh when I mentioned the lights. He stared past me for a long moment before saying, "They don't like being watched." I asked him who they were. He shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Mountain's been here longer than us, long enough to grow habits." Another local, woman in her 60s, lived near the forest edge, told me about a power outage years earlier. Same month. Same smell. She said the lights appeared first, drifting through the trees like lost stars. When I asked what happened next, she pressed her lips together and said, "Everyone who stayed tried to explain it. Everyone who left slept better." That stuck with me, because I had stayed at least long enough for whatever was out there to finish whatever it was doing. And part of me wondered if leaving afterward mattered at all. The dreams started that winter. Not nightmares, exactly, just repetitions. Fog, stillness, the sensation of being suspended between moments. Sometimes I was back in the van, sometimes I was standing in the clearing watching 3 warm impressions form in the soil before I ever arrived. In the dreams, I never saw the lights. I only felt their attention, gentle, distant, unmistakable. I woke from those dreams feeling seen. I changed my routines. I stopped rationalizing away unease. If a place felt wrong, I left, no matter how beautiful it was, no matter how inconvenient. I started trusting the first signal instead of waiting for proof. People talk about courage like it's pushing forward despite fear. After Mount Hood, courage meant turning around. That's the lesson I carry now when I talk about RV camping, about the romance of the open road and the danger of mistaking isolation for freedom. The wilderness doesn't owe us comfort, and it doesn't always announce its boundaries with claws or teeth. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it watches, Sometimes it lets you go, not because you've escaped, but because it's learned enough. I still camp. I still drive my Volkswagen van across long stretches of empty road, windows down, engine humming like a heartbeat I can trust. But I don't chase remoteness anymore. I don't seek places untouched by people as if that makes them pure, because untouched doesn't mean unoccupied. And Mount Hood, silent, massive, patient, taught me that the most frightening encounters aren't the ones that end in violence. They're the ones that end quietly, leaving you alive, changed, and forever uncertain whether what you experienced was a warning or an invitation. Even now, when the power flickers for no reason, when the forest goes still in that particular way, I pause, I listen, I smell the air, and I leave before the lights decide to return.